that we converted into a byte array, right? Awesome. And that file is a normal PNG file that we just got from our canvas. That is amazing because now we can simply upload this file right into our cloud storage, right? So we're all ready to go. The only thing we need to upload is an actual function to upload. And you know where this comes from. We can simply destructure something we're going to worry about in a second from use upload thing. And we can import that hook from our custom helpers and simply pass the image uploader in here. And that's already all we need to do. We can simply destructure the start upload function from here that we can now use to upload the file we just created, which is going to contain the exact way in which the user dragged around their image and scaled it, and simply call the start upload function. This takes an array that's gonna be our file. Technically, if we wanted to only upload one file, what you would expect is to just pass in the file. That's fine. This always takes an array in case you want to upload multiple files, which we don't. We just care about the one. And then let's also call this with our config ID that we are required to pass. And in this case, we are actually going to pass the config ID that we passed in as a property into this component. You remember when we scroll way up right here, that's what we receive as a prop, which is the configuration ID that comes from our database that we put in here. Why are we doing this? Why are we now passing the actual config ID string? Because, and that ties in very nicely with what I showed you earlier, because we want to not create a new configuration if no ID is passed, but now, right, the configuration, it already exists in our database because the user image is already there. So now, in this case, because in the upload we had the first step, right, where we create a new configuration, now we simply want to update the existing configuration with that cropped image. That's exactly why we made it optional right here, because now only in the second step do we actually update that with the cropped image URL that we get from upload thing, that we get from uploading the cropped image into our file system, right? So it all ties in. I think that's amazing. I really hope you can follow. It all ties in now. That's how the backend comes together. That's why we have this if statement with the configuration ID, because if we now pass the configuration ID, the second else case is going to be run. This one right here. And when the image upload is done, server side is going to be executed and update our database. It ties in so well, really, really nice. All right, and if anything goes wrong during this entire step, oh, and by the way, that's also await the start upload. This is an asynchronous action, so we want to wait until that's done. And if anything goes wrong during these stages up here or during the upload, for example, let's inform the user that something in fact went wrong. And that's going to happen inside of a toast notification. So at the very top, let's destructure the toast function from our use toast hook from our UI library. Awesome. That means we can now render out a toast error. Let's do that. Inside of our catch block, we can now simply invoke that toast function and pass it the title, and the title is gonna be oops, something went wrong. Then the description is going to be there was a problem saving your config, please try again, because we want the user to try again. It would really suck if they lost their configuration for any reason. And lastly, the variant is going to be we can choose between default and destructive. This is going to be destructive because something went wrong, right? Awesome. Let's try that. And by the way, do we get anything back from the start upload? Not really. Okay, so let's take a look at everything works correctly. We're going to save our configuration. And what we expect to happen is to then have the cropped image in our upload thing storage, right? So let's try out if that works. Let's clear the console. Let's reload the page. And hopefully everything works correctly. I'm going to open up my Explorer here so I can drag in an image. And sometimes this takes really long to load. Okay, let's load our network tab so we can see when the uploading here on the left starts. By the way, get rid of that. There we go. Okay, and let's try this. So I'm going to, and just to verify before clicking the continue button, let's go to uploadthing.com into our actual storage, right? Let's click dashboard. Let's open up, where is it? Case Corporate Dev. There we go. and then head to files. Okay, right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 files in here. Now we should have 6 after clicking the continue button. So let's do that. We should see a network request pop up, which is the upload. And that does happen. Beautiful. And now we should be able to see 6 images if we reload or upload thing. And we do. Beautiful. There is file name.png. And if we open this up, that is the cropped image of how we configured it on our phone. It starts at the ETS, right? The S from the sets, it's kind of cropped off because that's how we configured it. And it also is right here on the cropped image. And then the last thing we see is these 2 lines of text at the very bottom. And that's exactly as they are configured by the user as well. And then we can see for the text here, it might be a bit small for you to read. Checking, it says here, and then only the CHEC are still visible on the phone area. And then same thing right here. Beautiful. Very, very nice. That's exactly how we configured the image. And yeah, that's perfect. Okay, we now know that the uploading works correctly, which means when we hit continue, then the user image, how they configured it, is pixel perfect, saved in our database, which now means we are all set to actually also do the second thing that should happen when we save this, right? The cropped image is now saved. Now what we want to do is to update our database. With what, you might wonder? Well, what about these options? The color, the model, the material, and the finish. What about those? Well, we don't currently save those. And of course we should. Those should be stored in the database as the user configuration, right? And the first step in order to save this in our database is to even have the option to save it in our database. Because currently these, like the finish and the material, the model, these options don't actually even exist in our database. And I want to show you the way to do that. And that is by creating something called enums. Now, enum order status. Let's create that one first in our schema Prisma. Now, what is an enum? Well, basically, it's just a list of valid entries. For example, let me show you what this means. The order status, which we're going to need for later, is going to be either fulfilled. This can also be shipped, or lastly, this can be awaiting shipment. You see what this is? Again, we're not going to need this right now, but I want to use this to illustrate the point. These are the 3 possible order statuses. And that's it. These don't get a type. These are not like string. These are not like integer. No, that's not what this is for. This is just a list of valid entries. That's all an enum is in our database model. Same thing. Let's create an enum for the phone model. You can probably imagine what this will be, right? If we take a look at our validator, what are the phone models that we support? Well, all of these in the options, the iPhone X, iPhone 11, iPhone 12, and so on. This is a list of valid entries for the phone model, which is exactly what we are doing with the enums. So let's say iPhone X is going to be a valid phone model. Same thing for the iPhone 11, same thing for the iPhone, and I keep spelling them wrong, iPhone 12, iPhone 13, iPhone 14, and lastly, iPhone 15. And maybe, who knows, if you're watching this and the iPhone 16 is already out, go ahead and add that. But when I'm recording this, it's not out yet. So this is basically just a list of valid phone models that we can later use to store which model the user selected, the possible ones in our database, right? And similar thing for the case material that they can choose right here between silicone and polycarbonate. We're going to create an enum case material, and to store which one material and to store which one the user selected, we are going to create both of these in our database as well. That is going to be silicone, and then the second one is going to be polycarbonate, just like that. Lastly, of course, we also want to keep track of which finish the user selected in our database. So you can probably guess by now, enum case finish is going to be either, let's see, what do we have? The smooth or the textured. All right, so let's add the smooth. And let's also add the textured enum right here. Beautiful. And now, where do we use these enums? Right now, these are just independent. Well, we store this information along with the model configuration, right? Because that is part of the configuration of the user and which options they chose obviously is a part of that. So let's keep track of the model that the user selected, the iPhone model, and that's gonna be the phone model. And this will also be optional because we're not gonna initialize the configuration with the phone model, as this is only chosen in step 2 of our configuration and not in step 1. Right, so we're gonna update the entry later with this, but we're not gonna know it when we create the configuration. Right, then the material is going to be the case material. Same logic, case material. And same logic here, this needs to be optional because we're only adding it later on in step 2. The finish is going to be the case finish, same logic, optional. And lastly, I think what we did not add yet are the model colors. Yeah, right, we didn't add those. So what we need to do is to create one last enum. That's gonna be the available colors for our phone model. Let's call this the case color. And the ones they can choose from are black, blue, and rose. And if you decided to add any color here yourself, of course, include that as the possible case colors that the user can choose from that we now can keep track of in our database. So let's also add the color in here, and that's going to be the case color. Same logic, also optional because we're only adding it later in step 2. Beautiful. Okay, now, once again, after making changes to our schema.prisma, we need to tell our remote database about these changes. And in order to do that, just like we did last time, let's execute the npx prisma db push command that is going to push these changes into our remote database. And it's also going to restart our TypeScript server. So all of our local types are also up to date with our database config. And why did this not work? Prisma schema loaded from your database is now in sync. Operation not permitted. Interesting. Why did that happen? Okay, I don't know why it happened, but it works just fine. If we look into our remote database, it did actually update the table with the color, finish, material, and model. So that worked just fine. So this error is not related to the pushing. And I don't really know what it's related to. Maybe this is because I have low disk space on my PC. That could be an issue. Let's just reload our window and we should be up to date with the TypeScript types. Anyways, let's continue. And if that should be an issue later on, then we're going to fix it. But I don't think this is a big issue. And chances are you are not getting this error. I think this might be related to my low disk space. I'm not sure. Again, if this should be an issue later on that you are also facing, of course, we're going to fix it, but I don't think this is a big deal. So let's just go ahead and continue. So to keep track of these values in our database, the model, the material, and so on, our remote database now knows about these values and that they're optional. How do we put them in our database? And this is where the coolest data kind of fetching or modification approach of all time comes in. I like this so much and I want to show you exactly how to do it. So what we're gonna do, first things first, is install an npm package, and that is at tanstack/react-query. And that's gonna allow us to do something absolutely magical. I only learned about this like 2 or 3 weeks ago that this is even possible, and I really want to show you how this works. And as the basis, we're gonna use React Query, or now known as Tanstack React Query, same thing. It's gotten a lot of traction and I use this in literally all of my projects. It's gotta be my favorite library of all time. It's absolutely nice. So if you've never used it, now is the time to learn it together with me. It's really good. And I'm gonna stop hyping it up, I promise. Let's just do it. So we're gonna say npm install at tanstack/react-query and hit enter. That's gonna install the package and we can set it up once it's installed. And there we go, it's installed, beautiful. And the setup for this package is really easy. What we're gonna do is let's go into our sidebar and create a new component in our components folder. And this component is going to be named providers.tsx, because what React Query requires is a provider, a context provider. So for React context, right? And that can only happen in client-side components. So at the very top, we're gonna say use client. And now let's define the const providers is nothing more than a regular React component, right? That we're gonna export default at the bottom, the providers. Now, what is this going to return? This is going to return the React Query Context Provider. Basically, it just allows us to use React Query across our entire application if we do this. So in here, we're going to return a query client provider, and we should be able to automatically import that. If we're not able to, because it comes from a package which we have just installed, TypeScript might not know about it yet. So let's quickly reload our developer window using Shift, Control, and P, and then hitting developer reload window. That's gonna reinitialize TypeScript, and now it should hopefully know where to import this from. It still doesn't. Wow. Okay. Anyways, let's just import it ourselves then. Let's say import query client provider. There we go. From @tanstack/react-query. And then it should know about that, right? So now it should complain property client is missing. That's fine. At least now it knows where to grab this from, which is tanstack react query. And this takes something called a client. This client is very useful for caching. Tanstack Query automatically has built-in caching. And to take full advantage of that, let's create a cons client. That's going to be equal to a new query client and simply invoke that. The query client also comes from tanstack react query, the query client. There we go. And we can simply pass this client into the query client provider. All of this we only need to do once to use tanstack react query across our entire app, by the way. So just conceptually, what we're doing here, we're basically wrapping our entire app inside of this query client provider. Let's call it QCP, query client provider. That's this component we grab from React Query. And now the beautiful thing is anywhere where we use React Query in our app, for example, let's say over here we fetch some data, or over here we fetch some data. If we fetch data from here, for example, from, let's give this a bit less space, there we go. For example, let's say we fetch data from /API/hello, and we also fetch the same data like 10 seconds later in another component. Because we use the query client provider and wrap our entire app with it, that is actually going to cache the result from this API hello, so that when we call it from anywhere else in the application, we can simply draw from the cache instead of making that same request with the same answer again, right? So it handles caching and a lot of stuff other than caching as well, but I'm not gonna bore you too much with it. Under the hood, it's super useful, and it just does all that under the hood for us. And that is why we wrap our app inside of this query client provider. Because again, I want you to understand why we're doing what we're doing. And in order to wrap our app, we need to receive some children in this component. And these children, we can inline their type. Children are going to be of type React Node. So any React component is totally fine, or any HTML element totally fine as well. And we can simply render them out right here inside of our query client provider, essentially wrapping our app. And now to actually use it, we're going to do that inside of our root layout. Let's navigate over here, and we can simply wrap the entire app, which are our children, everywhere where we need access to React Query. Let's cut those children out and wrap them in our providers component that we just created. Then paste the children back in here. So we're wrapping all of what comes then in our app as the children with the query client provider from React Query. And that's the basis for how we do it. We can close out of this file. We're never gonna touch it again. We don't need to, we're completely done in the providers. Essentially, all we just did is make us able to now use React Query to save the phone color, the phone model, the material, and so on. And now comes my favorite part, what I kind of hyped up like 5 minutes ago. I want to show you how this works. So in our design folder, we're going to create a file, and that is going to be called actions.ts. These are server-side logic functions that we can write in here, assuming we say at the very top, use server. That's how we specify to Next.js, this is Next.js specific, that we only want to execute everything that is in this file on the server, never on the client, right? And that's important because we're going to use our database in here. First thing, let's say export async function save config, and this will be the function responsible for saving our like color, finish, material, and model. right? That's going to happen inside of this function. And this is something called an RPC, a remote procedure call, essentially just looking like we are calling a function, which also means because we treat this as a function, we can simply retrieve all the parameters that we need, right? Which is the color, the finish, the material, the model, and lastly, the config ID to save this to. So this is not something we need to pass as URL parameters. This is not something we need to pass inside of a post request body. No, this is as if you were calling, I mean, technically you are literally calling a function. And that is what's called an RPC, a remote procedure call, something that's a extremely important pattern. I learned this at my first ever developer job, and RPCs are amazing. That's how literally our entire software worked back at that place where I worked. Right? And in order to tell TypeScript what these are, we can simply benefit from the validator that we have already created, because all the allowed values are literally already inside of here. Similar, they are already in our database, right? And the database, that's the beautiful thing about Prisma. If we look in here, these are actually fully valid types that we can simply get from our database. How does that look in practice? Well, let's tell TypeScript the type of these options. So for example, the color, we can simply grab the color and we can import that from Prisma client, right? Or it's called the case color, I guess, right? And the finish, same thing. That's going to be the, let's see what we call it in Prisma, the case finish, right? We can simply put that right here and import that type. The material, there we go, is going to be the case material. Simply import that from Prisma as well. The model is going to be, what did we call that one? I forgot. Did we call it the phone? Yeah, the phone model. We can simply grab that, paste it here, import that from Prisma as well. And how cool is that, right? We can literally just grab the types as they are. And then we can also get the config ID. And that's simply going to be a string. Nothing special, but we need to know which config to update with these values, right? And that's already it. Inside of this function, we can now execute server-side code because at the top we specified use server. This will only run on the server just like an API route, for example, right? That means we can now access our database. We can say await DB and import our database to interact with it. Dot configuration at the very bottom right here. Dot update, of course, right? The configuration already exists, and now we want to put like the color, the model, the material, and the finish, and update the configuration with that value. First off, we need to specify which configuration we want to update with the where clause, and that's simply gonna be at the ID, where that is the config ID that we pass into this function as an argument, right? And then the data we want to update this with, Prisma also expects that, is gonna be the color, the finish, the material, and the model. We can simply pass in here. Now there's a bunch of other options, of course, but we don't care about those. And we only care about these 4 things that the user specified right here in their selection screen, right? And that's it. That's all we need to do, right? We can already save this actions.ts file. Let's close out of some of this, and we are all ready to go and use this function with React Query now in our design configurator. And that's the beautiful pattern that I want to show you. How does this work? Let's worry about the destructuring later. Let's say const empty object is going to be equal to use mutation, which is a hook we can destructure from React Query. And this takes an object. In here, we can specify the mutation key. And this is going to be in an array, the save-config. This is any string that you want. You can put whatever you want in here. This is important for caching. If this is cached, then if we have this mutation at any other place, if we want to, and we can benefit from the cache. And this is also for invalidation, right? The data we get from this is not something we're gonna take advantage of. We don't need that right now. But if you wanted to say that the cache should be invalidated, that's in here, that's what we do with the mutation key or the query key. If we had a use query, which is used for get requests, that's what the mutation key is for. In our case, this is any arbitrary string. We're not going to use that part of React Query because we don't need to, but React Query allows you to do that, and that is beautiful. And as for the mutation FN, mutation function that we want to pass in here, this is going to be an asynchronous function, and this will, let's open this up, take some arguments. Let's name this args. And these args are essentially exactly what we pass in the save config function that we have right here, right? So one thing we can do is to literally grab the entire TypeScript annotation for our save config and then export a type, and let's call this, for example, the save config args type, and that is going to be equal to an object that contains these values. And then we can simply use the save config args right down here, and we can now also import the save config args into this file, right, to directly type out what the arguments are that we want to put in our mutation function. Now what that allows us to do is wherever we call the mutate, what we can destructure from the use mutation, and let's rename it, let's say save config, and now wherever we try to invoke this function, you don't need to follow along, I'm just showing this to you, then we are expected to pass in these variables for the type save, where we now need to pass in, like the color, config ID, material, and so on, wherever we call this function, which is awesome. Now, inside of this mutation function, we're going to do two things. If you remember what we want to do here, it's both update the database and also save the cropped image, right? And these can actually happen independent from each other. They are not related. So for performance reasons, we are going to execute them at the same time, simultaneously. The way we do that is by using an await promise.all, and now all array elements that we pass in here are executed at the same time, and that's just faster, and it's also just more efficient, right? So the both things we want to do is first save the cropped image. We already have a function to do that. If you remember, it's right down here, the save configuration, which means we can simply go ahead and call that right here. And the second thing we want to execute at the same time as the save configuration is our action, the save config. Right? And to avoid a naming conflict between our mutate and the save config, we're going to import that and rename it as underscore save config. And then, yeah, let's just import that first. Let's go to the very top and let's also import the save config, but let's rename it as underscore save config from our /actions. To avoid the naming conflict, as I just mentioned. And now we can simply call it, and we are expected to pass all these arguments in here, but we already have access to them as the args right here. So we can simply pass in the args as they are. TypeScript is happy, awesome, very, very good. And now whenever we call this function, this one function, everything is going to be saved, right? These two functions are called and everything is saved for us. Which is really nice. We don't have to worry about the logic then anymore. We just need to call this function up here and everything else is handled for us. Beautiful. Now, if anything goes wrong during either the save configuration or the updating of our database, in that case, on error, that's what we can pass into React Query. This is one of the most useful stuff we can pass in here. What should happen if anything goes wrong? We can simply render out a toast notification. Let's call our toast as the title for this toast. Let's say something went wrong. As the description for this toast, let's say there was an error on or end, period. Please try again, period. And lastly, as the variant, of course, to make this like red and seem like an error, we want to use the destructive variant for this toast notification. Beautiful. Now, what should happen if we are successful, right? We also need to handle that case. What should happen in that case? Basically, we want to redirect the user to the third step, right? Step 2 is done, everything is saved. And now we want to go to step 3 to let them review their final design with the image that we saved. And in order to do that, let's handle the on success case as well. This is just a callback function. And now we want to push them to that third step. And in order to do that, just like from step 1 to step 2, we're going to use the Next.js router to do that. Const router is equal to use router, which is a hook we can import from /navigation and not /router, as I mentioned earlier, because that's for the old kind of Next.js. And now inside of this on success, we can simply router.push. Where do we want to push the user? To a template string, and that's going to be /configure/ and then preview. That's going to be the name of the third step right here. And lastly, we want to append the configuration ID. So $ID is going to be equal to, and then as a dynamic kind of insertion into this template string, the config ID that is passed into this component as a prop, right, from our server. from the main page.tsx, which is a server-side component that renders out this design configurator. Awesome. Okay, we handled the error case, we handled the success case. Let's try if it works. So what we expect to happen right now, and by the way, we can also start at, let's start at 0, right? Let's go to the homepage. Let's verify that everything works up until this point. That might take a bit because again, my PC is very slow. I already have the new PC, by the way. It's a Mac. And I'm really happy because it's much faster than my new PC, but I didn't want to switch out my operating system while making this video, like in half of it. That just didn't make a lot of sense to me, but it would load the pages much faster. But I'm still using my Windows PC, my 7-year-old one, to make this video. So it takes a bit longer sometimes. All right, so let's click create case, and I'm just gonna upload this image of me right here. You can upload any image that you want, any PNG, JPEG, or JPEG that you want. And oops, no, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to click. All right, we are redirected. That works. We can kind of put our image anywhere we want it. Let's put it, so I'm kind of peeking into the phone right here. Let's select blue as the color, or actually no, I like black more. Let's go with the iPhone 15, select all the premium options, and then once we hit continue, we expect everything to work well and for us to be redirected to the next step, which of course will be a 404 page because it doesn't exist yet, but let's try that out. Let's hit continue. We should see the network request being made successfully. That is good. And then hopefully we will be redirected. Let's give this a bit less space. Let's see what's going on in our console. Where are we running this? Okay, upload things successfully simulated callback. That is good. Why are we not being redirected? Interesting. So what's happening? We didn't get an error message. Oh, wow, dude. Okay, we never even... Okay, well, my bad. We never even call the save config function. Of course, nothing is going to happen, man. All right, we of course need to call the function. All right, so all we're doing right now is saving the cropped image, which of course is good, but we want to actually save everything. So let's go down to our button right here that says continue and actually call the correct function. Let's call the save config. And in here, this takes the arguments, the config ID that is passed into a prop as a prop into this component. The color is going to be the options.color.value. The finish that this takes is going to be the options.finish.value. So basically all the values from the state that the user chose, right? We can simply pass in here. Same thing for the material. That's going to be the options.material.value. And lastly, the phone case model is going to be the options.model.value. Awesome. We can now save that and let's try this again. Let's reload the page. That's going to let us resize or image once that's loaded, which is a bit slower on my PC. We can already go ahead and open up the network tab because that's where the successful network requests will come in if everything works correctly. All right, let's read out the page. All right, let's make the image larger. Same thing. I'm gonna make it so I peek into the phone right here. And then let's choose just the polycarbonate is fine. We don't need the finish. And let's hit continue. And then okay, something went wrong. Good that we tested this. What is the problem? We can take a look into our console probably as to what is happening. 580 milliseconds. So it seems like something is failing on our actions.ts. Do we get any error message right here? Invalid prisma.configuration.update. Interesting. So it does seem to be a database issue. Maybe the issue from before wasn't so mundane as I thought. So first step is let's get rid of all these consoles, by the way, that's just way too much. Let's try pushing into our database again, npx prisma db push. So the issue probably is with our database. I wonder what it could be. Interesting, now it worked. There was no error. I didn't change anything from before, but that pushing just worked. Did we not push after creating the enums? That's possible. I think we didn't push any changes after creating the enums. That is why that didn't work. Okay, so we need to push our changes, of course, to synchronize our remote database with our local Prisma file. That's very important. So our local, so the remote database knows about these enums, right? It has to, and if we want to actually update that enum or those multiple enums right here in our function, right? Of course, we need to push into our database. Let's try this again. Let's reload the page. And now hopefully we should see the network request being successful. And we should also get redirected to the /preview, which is going to throw a 404. But as long as we get redirected, we know that everything is working correctly. All right, let's reload the page. There we go. Let's drag this image kind of larger. Same thing. And let's hit continue. And now these requests should be successful. If we did everything correctly. That one is successful. That one is successful. Good. The callback was successful as well. Nice. And we are being redirected to a 404. Perfect. That's exactly what we want. Nice. Very, very good. That means we set up everything correctly. The cropped user image is stored exactly as the user configured it. In this step right here, we are forwarded. The configuration is saved in our database via the action. Very, very nice. And this pattern that I hyped up earlier, of that we can simply use a server action inside of React query and handle the loading state and the success as this, like this. That is so cool. I'm such a big fan of this. As I said earlier, I only found out about like 2 weeks ago that this even works with server actions, and we don't even need to write an API for this. That is so nice, and now you know about it too. I'm really happy with how this works. Very good. Everything works. Up until this point, you did a really good job. All the configuration is saved, like the color and the phone model and the user image, which means that's the perfect basis to now summarize everything that the user chose, all the premium options and the phone model and so on, in the next step, where they will then be able to actually check out to pay us for their phone case, which is going to be one of the most fun steps because we're implementing payments there with Stripe. That's going to be really cool. Very, very nice. I'm very happy that works. Perfect. So when we now click this button, we are redirected to the preview page. So let's do that once again. Let's just click the button because that's right where we can continue on the preview page. And just as the same logic, you remember how we get the ID for the configuration inside of our configurator. It's passed as a query parameter, right? We have the ID is equal to, and then ... I'm just gonna say that that's the configuration ID, right? That we then receive in a server-side component first. That's gonna be the page.tsx, and then that's passed into the client-side component as a... Why can I not copy that? Hello. Thank you. That's then passed into the client-side component as a prop, right? So we can access it in the client-side component and do whatever we want with it. The same logic is going to apply right now for the previous step, because as you can see, we also passed the ID of the configuration to that URL. So what we're going to do is also fetch the configuration for the ID on the server side, so that doesn't happen on the client, because of course we're going to use the database to do that. And then we already know when the page is rendered and that this configuration exists and what the configuration is in the preview for the design, right? So same logic as we did before. So let's give this a lot more space. Let's take a look at the URL. That's going to be /configure/preview. And in Next.js fashion, how that works is we need to go into our app folder, into configure, and then create a folder with the name that's actually going to end up in the URL. So in our case, that's going to be preview. And inside of here, create a new page.tsx, just like before, with the design and the upload, with that kind of naming convention. And as always, the const page is going to be an arrow function that we can simply export default at the bottom. There we go. And now again, by default, this will be a server-side component in which we can receive the ID as a search parameter that we can immediately destructure. So let's get access to these search params right here in the page properties. And let's say these are going to be of type page props. And now to define them, we can create an interface right above our page, interface page props, and we can now simply define the type of those search params. The search params, so we did that before, are gonna have a key, and that key for the search params is gonna be like the ID. For example, right, this is the key. So question mark key is equal to value, and that might be a bit small for you. Let me quickly copy that over and make that a bit larger. So if we paste that in, then with the question mark, we're basically saying we want to append a query parameter to the current URL. That's what that means. The ID is the, can I make this? Yeah, the ID is the key. So that's what we have right here. That's a string. And then the value of that key will be this entire part. No, this entire part. There we go. That's the value, right? So we have the key. That's going to be a string, and that key is going to have a value, and that's going to be of type string or string array or undefined if the query parameter is not passed in. Perfect. So now TypeScript knows what the hell is even happening here, and we can immediately destructure the ID from the search params to actually, search params to get access to this value that is highlighted in red here on the right hand side. And if no ID is passed into this page when calling this URL, or the type of ID is not equal to string, in that case, well, something is wrong, right? We can't process the ID. That doesn't make sense. So in that case, we're going to return the not found. That is provided to us by Next.js once again to throw a 404 error, right? If the ID is not even there, or if it's invalid format, if it's not a string. Then let's actually get the configuration from our database for this ID, right? Let's say const configuration is going to be equal to await db. Let's import our database here. And in order to be able to use the await keyword, we need to mark this page as an asynchronous server-side component. Because this runs on the server, we can totally do that. Then let's call the await db.configuration.find unique to grab the configuration of the ID that was passed in as a query parameter to see if this actually exists, right? So to tell Prisma where it needs to search, which property to search for, we're going to pass in the where ID. And if that doesn't exist, if there is no configuration with this ID that was passed in, that's very possible, right? Then we can say if not configuration, in that case, we're also going to return a not found. That's going to throw the 404 error. Beautiful. Okay, and now lastly, we know this configuration exists. We know the ID is valid. It exists in our database. So actually, let's give the user what they are searching for, which is the preview, right? Like a summary of their order. What are they ordering? The color, the model, and so on. And that's going to happen inside of a client-side component because we're going to make use of some client-side utilities, like for example, state. So let's define a new component in here and return that component, and that's going to be a design preview component that of course currently doesn't exist in our app. So let's create it, and we're going to create it right here as well in the preview folder because it's going to be very closely dependent on the logic of the page, right? It's not going to be a reusable component. We don't want it to be. So let's call it the design preview.tsx. And once again, const design preview, nothing else than an arrow function. Then we can export default design preview at the very bottom. And then we can already go ahead and import that in our page.tsx for the preview. All right, let's head over to our design preview and actually return some JSX. Let's just return a fragment so TypeScript is happy, so it knows this component does something. And then inside of this component, the first thing we're gonna do is create a div element. And this div is gonna get a class name of, first off, pointer events none, because this is going to be a purely decorational div. And you're going to see with what exactly. That's a pretty cool effect I'm going to show you. The select dash none, we don't want this to be selectable. Absolute, there we go. An inset of 0, an overflow dash hidden, flex, and lastly a justify center. And because this div is purely decorational, we're going to give it an area hidden of true as well. So it's not going to show up if you're going to use any kind of accessibility device, like a screen reader, for example. So just as an accessibility best practice. And inside of here, we're going to make use of a React package called React DOM Confetti. Yes, that's right. We're going to put some confetti here. React DOM Confetti. Let me show you what this looks like. I think there's a demo page even for this confetti package. Yeah, there's a demo here. Let's open it up. Let's play around. Well, basically, you can define some stuff and then play some confetti with that, with the velocity and duration and stagger and a lot of stuff you can customize here. We don't even need to do all of that. It's going to be just a really fun kind of confetti effect to let the user know, hey, you're done, like, nice, you configured the phone case, you can now order it if you want. It's just a nice little detail. And in order to do that, let's say npm install react dom, there we go, confetti, and install that package. Now, there's a lot of configuration options, as you just saw, angle, spread, velocity, and so on. We're not going to worry about any of that. All we care about is that we import confetti as a default import from react dom confetti at the very top of the file. And we can now simply put that confetti as a regular React component, self-closing by the way, inside of this div element. And this will take two properties. First off, this needs to know when it is active. When do we want it to be active? Well, basically, and we can already save this to get rid of the error that we get right here. Oh, and is the dev server not started? Well, let's start it up again after installing that package, so we can actually see what's happening right here. Now, the idea is that this takes something called the active property, and we want it to be active as soon as the page loads, right? So in order to do that, let's create a state. And yes, this actually needs to be done through state. You can't just pass it a true. That just doesn't really work. I tried that. So we're going to create a const show confetti and a set show confetti state. And that's going to be equal to use state, and simply call that function. By default, this is going to have a value of false. And then inside of a use effect, right under that, let's import use effect from React. Inside of a use effect, this takes a callback function, and we can simply set show confetti to true. So by default, it will be not showing, and then once the component actually mounts, once it renders, immediately the confetti will be active. So we can say active is equal to show confetti, and that's going to work. Now, in order to use this client-side React hook, we still need to mark this component as a client-side component by saying use client at the very top by using that directive. And now we can pass this a very minimal config into this confetti object. This config is going to be an object, and we're going to say element count 200, and we're going to say spread 90. And there's a bunch of other options like the random height and some stuff you just saw here in the demo, but we're not going to worry about any of that. This is all we're going to pass in here. Let's try this out. Let's see what happens. Once we load this page, we should be able to see. And why are we getting oh, there we go. Okay, yes, that's our confetti. That looks awesome. And we can also see that these steps automatically work. We are on step 3. We have completed step 1 and 2, and if we reload this page, there's going to be some beautiful confetti flying from the top. That just looks awesome. All right, very, very nice. That's just a cool detail, but details like these really make your app that much better. I just really enjoy little stuff like this. Little interactions, you know, that's what makes a web app really fun. Not only to build, but also to use, right? So right after or confetti, we are going to continue with a div element. And this div is going to get a class name of margin top 20, a grid calls of 1, a text small. On small devices, we're going to give it a grid calls of 12. On small devices, we're going to give it a grid rows of 1. Then on small devices, a gap x of 6. On medium devices, a gap x of 8. And on large devices, a gap x of 12. So just a bit more. Let's open this div up and put one more div in here. And this one is going to get a class name of small call span 4, which means from the 12 columns we create, this is going to take up 4 of those from small devices and up. On medium devices, a call span 3. So it's going to take up 3 columns. On medium devices, there we go. Medium devices, a row span 2 this time, not column, but row span. And then lastly, on medium devices, a row and 2. And this defines in which row do we want this to end. So basically, if we had imagine this 2x2 grid, right? Let's say stroke is going to be white. There we go. And we have this 2x2 grid. Then, for example, what a row span 2 means is that it will take up 2 rows, right? That's all it means. Very, very simple. All right. Now, inside of this div element, let's open that up, goes our phone, right? The kind of phone preview that we created as a custom component. And the image for this phone will actually be the cropped user image that we want to show. So basically, we want to show the user the phone as it looks like as they configured in step 2. Right, so the same kind of version, so they know, hey, what I did is actually what I'm getting, what I'm ordering, right? So now we need access to the cropped image that we're keeping track of in our database as the cropped image URL, right? We know where that lives, but we now need to get access to that to show it in our phone. Nothing easier than that, because in the overarching server-side component, we already have access to the configuration, right? So we can simply pass this configuration as a prop into our design preview component. You can simply say configuration is equals to configuration. There we go. And that's currently not a prop we are expecting in this child component, but we should be expecting it. So let's define the configuration as a accepted property. And this, we can inline the type is going to be of type configuration as an object. And the type of this will be configuration. Because this exists in our database, we can simply grab that type from Prisma/client, right? Everything we define in our Prisma schema, like the configuration, the case color, the case finish, and so on, these are all actual TypeScript types provided to us. That's why Prisma is a really nice ORM to work with. It's very developer friendly. And just like that, we get access to our configuration in this client-side component and can now use this cropped kind of preview URL as our image source for the phone. So in here, we can pass the configuration dot, and then we should be able to see the cropped image URL right here. And because we know that in step 3, this will exist because step 2 is done, right? The user has uploaded this already, so we know it will exist. But TypeScript doesn't, because technically this is optional. TypeScript doesn't know that we updated our config. So let's put an exclamation point at the very end to make TypeScript happy, because we know better than TypeScript in this case. Okay, a little cut there because I noticed one little change that we need to make. Very, very small change, by the way, because as you'll notice right now, the image is not actually displayed correctly. This looks a bit weird. The image that we have is correctly cropped, right? But the position on the phone is not right. So to fix that, we can go into our phone component. If you're wondering where in the file tree that lives, it's right here under components/phone. That's where we are. And simply to the image class name of this phone, we can add a minimum width, a min width of full, and also a minimum height of full. And if you're wondering what does this apply under the hood, it's the min width 100% and min height 100%. So we're basically telling the image, at minimum, you should take up all the space you can. And there we go. Now it's cropped correctly as the user did it, right? Perfect. So it takes up the space it should. Awesome. And because we allow for a custom class name to be passed into this phone, we can also give it the class name for the color, right? To make the color of the phone whatever it should be. And we can grab that from our configuration. We can destructure from the configuration property that we pass in here. Let's grab the color. And now to actually get the tailwind color that corresponds to that color, well, we can simply take a look into our option validator, right? What are the colors that we support? And what are we searching for? Basically, we're searching for the value right here inside of the colors array. So the color here can be like black or rose, or what was the third one we support? Blue, right? So we basically want to find the color where that's the value and then apply that object's tailwind property, right? Maybe that sounds a bit abstract. All I'm trying to say is, let's say const tw is equal to, and let's search inside of our colors that we still need to import from our option validator, dot find. And for each, let's name this the supported color. For each supported color that we know is all right to have as the background for the phone, we can simply return if the supported color dot value, as I just explained, is triple equal to the color that we get from our configuration. And only what we care about is the dot tw of that, if that exists, right? And if it does, then this is either going to be zinc 900, blue 950, or rows 950 that we can now pass in as a class name into our phone, because we do support dynamic class names here. So let's, instead of a string, do this dynamically and use our cn helper function that we still need to import. And as a template string, we're going to apply the bg of tailwind right here. So let's save that and let's see if that works. Let's reload our page. And now our phone case should be black. Perfect. And if we configured it as rose or blue, then that would change accordingly. And we could make use of this dynamic tailwind background for our phone. Beautiful. Okay, let's format this file. Let's expand this. Let's see what's happening here. Very, very nice. Our phone is displayed right here. And now, very similar to how we found the correct color for this phone case, we now want to find the correct iPhone model that the user bought, right? So we can get access to the model we saved in our database by destructuring the model from here. And now what we care about is the label for this model, right? What we grab from our database, this model right here, is going to be the lowercase. It's going to be this one, iPhone X, iPhone 11, as like one word, not properly formatted, not what the user should see as the label, right? What we now want is the label for that value. And we can apply the same logic. We can simply search for it in our supported models. So what we're going to do is we're going to destructure later from the models in all caps, because this is going to be our constant that we're going to search through. And we're going to search through the options for each model. .find, we can destructure the value for each entry here and simply return if the value is triple equal to the model. And to tell TypeScript, yes, we know this exists, this will be supported, don't worry, we can put a little exclamation point at the very end. And because what comes from our database is of course going to be a supported model, right? But TypeScript doesn't really know it. Sometimes it's a bit, well, I'm not gonna say stupid, because how should it know, right? That would be unfair, but sometimes we have to tell it as some stuff. So we can destructure the label from here, and we're gonna call this the model label, just so we don't get confused as to what the label is for. It's for the model, that's why we name it that. And that we can now render out in our JSX and actually display to the user. So after one closing div after the phone, let's create a new div right here with one closing div to go. This one is going to get a class name of margin top 6. On small devices, a call span of 9. On small devices, a margin top of 0. And on medium devices, a row end of 1. Let's open this up, and inside of here create an H3, a heading 3 element. That's gonna say your, and then dynamically the model label, and then case. Right, and we can even uppercase the C just to make it look a bit nicer. And this H3 is going to get a class name as well. That's gonna be a text of 3XL, a font dash bold, then a tracking dash tight, and lastly, there we go, and lastly a text gray of 900. Just like that. Let's format this and already see what this looks like. Let's give this a lot more space. Your iPhone X case, and why is the text so small? Did I do a typo? I did. Text 3XL. There we go. If we don't do a typo, then the text should be a lot larger and it should look a lot nicer. Nice. Your iPhone X case. Beautiful. Let's give this a bit less space. That's automatically going to be below our phone, and below this H3, let's now put a div element with a class name. That's going to be a margin top of 3, flex, items dash center, a gap of 1.5, and a text of base. And inside of this div, let's put a check icon. This check icon comes from Lucid React. It's going to be self-closing, and this one gets a class name of height 4, width 4, text green 500. And right below this icon, we can simply say in plain text, in stock and ready to ship, to let the user know, hey, if you order now, you're gonna get it pretty fast. Hopefully, right? You're not gonna have to wait long for your phone case. Perfect. With two closing divs later, with one closing div to go, this is where we're going to create one more div. And this one gets a class name of small call span 12. On medium devices, a call span 9 and a text of base. Inside of this div, let's open it up and scroll down a bit. We're going to create one more div, and that's going to get a class name of grid, a grid calls of 1, a gap y of 8, a border dash B for bottom, a border gray of 200, a padding y of 8. On small devices, a grid calls 2. On small devices, a gap x of 6. On small devices, a padding y of 6. And on medium devices, a padding y of 10. Let's open this div up, and inside of here lives one more div. This one is not going to get any class name, it's just as a wrapper for the grid. Inside of here, we're gonna create a p tag, and that's gonna say highlight, or let's say highlights. There we go. And this p tag will get a class name of font-medium and a text zinc of 950, pretty dark. And then below this p tag, we're gonna create a ol in ordered list, right? That's what it stands for, with a class name of margin top 3, a text zinc of 700, a list disk, which is basically going to put like little dots before each item in this list, and a list inside. That's how we define that they should count as padding for the list. And inside of here, we're going to create an li element. And first one is going to say wireless charging compatible. There we go. So basically we're listing a few highlights of our product. The second li element is going to say TPU shock absorption. And this is just some stuff that I made up, okay? Like I have no idea what you're selling in the store, or if you're just showing this off on your portfolio, that's totally cool as well. It just sounds good for a phone case. I have no idea what this actually means. I just grabbed it from some other phone case shops, I guess. So I hope that's actually a thing, like TPU shock absorption. I think it is though. I think it is. Third one is gonna say packaging made from recycled materials. And then the last li element is gonna say 5-year print warranty. There we go. Okay, so basically just a bunch of, I guess, marketing stuff, or, you know, basically listing the highlights of our product. And why are the dots for the list not showing up? Yeah, I made a typo. There we go. List disk. There we go. All right, let's reload this. And then we should, yes, see them show up right there. Perfect. Okay. And now below the closing div after the OL, let's create one more div. This one is also not going to get any class name. Let's open this up and let's create a p tag in here that's going to say materials. And this p tag is going to get a class name of font medium and a text zinc of 950 as well. And just like with the ordered list above, we're going to create an ordered list here as well. That gets a class name of margin top 3 and a text zinc of 700. And just like before, a list of disk and a list inside to list the bullet points inside of the tags, right? And in here lives an li element that's gonna say high quality durable material. Again, something I just made up, right? Because it sounds good. And then the second li element in here, li, is going to say scratch and fingerprint resistant coating. Awesome. Let's save that and see what that looks like. Let's read our page, because they should be listed right here. Perfect. Let's reload that again to get rid of the error. Sometimes that takes really long. They're going to be listed here side by side. That looks amazing. All right, so very, very nice. We have the highlights, we have the materials, we have the phone exactly how the user configured it with the cropped image. That looks awesome. Now we want to list the price. So if the user bought the item right now with their configuration of the texture and also the finish, how much will that cost the user? We need to tell them. And we're going to do that after the closing OL, after the closing div, and after one more closing div. So with 2 closing divs to go is where this is going to happen. Let's open up another div right here. And to space it out from the top one, we're going to give it a class name of margin top 8, just to kind of space it out. Inside of here, create one more div. This one will get a class name of bg gray 50, a padding of 6, on small devices a rounded large, and on small devices a padding of 8. Let's open this div up. Inside of here, let's create one more div, and this one just gets one single class name, and that's gonna be flow root. And to be honest, I don't fully know what this does. It just kind of works when we use it. We could Google, and I think we can flow root, and that's display flow root. So if we hover over this, this actually applies to display flow root. And again, I'm not totally sure what it does, flow root, it just kind of works. So the element generates a block box that establishes a new block formatting context. Listen, I'm not a CSS expert, I'm not gonna lie, okay? I know how to make web apps. There are probably better CSS people than me, like Kevin Powell, for example, that could explain it much better than I could. So I'm not gonna try to explain this. I don't know what it does. It just kind of works. So let's just use it. Oh, and by the way, also, it's not only going to be flow root, but also text of small. Because the text we want to put in here, the pricing shouldn't take up that much space on the screen. Now, inside of here, let's create a div element, and this one gets a class name, and that's going to be flex items-center, a justify between, a padding y of 1, and a margin top of 2. Let's open this div up, and inside of here lives a p tag, and that one gets a class name of text gray 600. And inside of here, we're gonna say base price. So you can probably imagine what we want to put in here. Let's create another p tag right below that, and this one will get a class name of font medium. There we go. And also a text gray of 900 to kind of nicely contrast it with the lighter and thinner version of the base price right here. And inside of here, we're going to say format price. We're going to use our utility function that we have written once to format the base underscore price that we have defined in our config. That is the basis for all products with no premium options selected. And remember, because that is in thousands with the underscore, so we can also use cents here, we want to divide the base price by 100 to show this in dollars. Or whatever you set your format price to. It doesn't have to be dollars, right? This could be euros, rupees. It doesn't really matter, whatever you prefer. And now, along with the base price, we also want to show how much the finish costs, right? So we need to know which finish did the user choose. And we can do that by destructuring simply the finish from our configuration. We also already have the information in our database. We can just go ahead and grab that to now go back down here to our base price. And if the user chose anything as the finish, then we're going to add to it. So after the closing div, let's create a conditional check right here. If the finish is textured, and we get full type safety here, by the way, hell yeah. In that case, we're going to render out some JSX, and in the other case, we're going to render out null. Now, what are we going to render out? That's going to be a div at the top level. And honestly, we can just go ahead and grab the one from before because it will look the exact same. So let's grab the div for the base price and let's just paste it in here. That's gonna work, beautiful. And instead of base price, we're gonna say textured finish. And then of course, we're not gonna use the base price in here, but the finishes. Let's import that from our option validator. Dot options at the index of 1 dot price. Why at the index of 1? Well, because that is our textured finish, right? This is index 0, this is index 1. That's where it lives, and it also contains the price right here. And honestly, you know what? That's not even the best solution. Why did I do that in the... No, you know what I much prefer? We use this one right here. We can directly use our product prices. Yeah, I think that's a much better option. Let's use our product prices instead, just on the fly here, kind of improvising. But I think this is a much cleaner approach, actually. I really prefer this. So instead of going into our finishes array, we can actually just grab the actual price right away. Much nicer. Beautiful. All right, and we want to do basically the same check for the polycarbonate, right? If the material is a polycarbonate material, the premium material, we also want to display that extra cost to the user. So just like with the finish, we can simply go ahead and grab the material that the user chose in step 2 from our configuration, and then use that to check if the material, and again, we get full type safety here, awesome, is polycarbonate. In that case, as the soft polycarbonate material, what we're going to write inside of the first p tag, we now want to display the price for that. And you can probably imagine what that will be. The product prices dot material dot polycarbonate, and because that's in thousands, again, divided by 100. Beautiful. Let's save that and see what happens. Let's reload the page. And then at the bottom, we should, let's give this a bit more space, see that the base price pops up right here. And if I zoom in like to the normal level, there it is, $14. That looks great. And well, I didn't choose any extras for my phone. Maybe you did, then you're gonna see that show up right here. Maybe I should have done that actually. You know what we can do? We can go in our database and change it. Let's visit our database, let's say npx Prisma Studio, and we can kind of emulate that I chose the premium options, right? We can go into our configuration, and what is the current ID? It ends in 7N for me, so it's gonna be this one right here. So let's just pretend that I went with the polycarbonate and the textured one, so the premium options. Let's save that, and then when we reload this page, we should actually be able, yes, to see that the premium options are listed as extra cost right here. That is awesome. All right, we have all the premium options listed as separate prices. Let's give this a bit less space. Well, that doesn't, yeah, there we go. That's like kind of half screen. We can see them all right here. The texture finish, the soft polycarbonate material. Beautiful. Now let's list the order total, and that's going to happen below this conditional check. Let's create a new div element right here. This is going to be self-closing. This is going to act as a visual separator between all the stuff up here and the total order price, right? So this can be self-closing with a class name of margin y2 to kind of space it out vertically, and a height of px, so 1 pixel. And let's give it a background gray of 200. If we save that, we can already see that popping up here on our page once my PC loads. There it is. There's the separator. Awesome. And below this, let's create a div element. This one gets a class name of flex items center, justify dash between, and lastly a padding y of 2. And when we open this up, first off, let's create a p tag saying order total, and this p tag is going to get a class name of font semi-bold and a text gray of 900, and so it's a bit stronger in color than these above ones. And then after this p tag, we're going to create one more p tag containing the actual price. It's going to get a class name of font semi-bold as well, and similarly a text gray 900. So it's going to be the same style as the div above. And now we want to display the total order price, and we could probably inline calculate this right here, but we don't really want to. I think a much cleaner approach is to go to the very top of the file and kind of calculate the price here. It's just much easier if you kind of divide the logic and the JSX into two separate pieces, logic, JSX, and kind of maintain that split. So in here, let's say let total price is what we're going to name this. And that's going to be default to the base underscore price. So that was the like 1,400 cents that we have, right? And if the material is triple equal to the polycarbonate, full type safety, oh yeah, we're going to say price is plus equal the product underscore price is what we had earlier, dot material dot polycarbonate. There we go. So we're adding that price. And now if the finish is triple equal to textured, in that case, and why is this giving us an error, by the way? Cannot find name price. Oh, because we named it total price. That's going to be like the total order price. I think that naming is better than just price. There we go. So if the finish is textured, in that case, we're also going to add the price plus equal, we're going to add the product prices dot, and now finish dot textured, right? Beautiful. And once again, I forgot that this is total price. There we go. And now we have the total order price for everything, including the premium options if the user chose them. And we can simply render that out inside of this p tag. But first, of course, render it inside of our format price function. So it's going to be nicely formatted, divided by 100, because we still have the thousands in there, right? And if we save that, then beautiful, we're going to see the order total pop up right here, and we are all good for the customer to start their order. Beautiful. Now the only button that's left here is the only thing that's left here is the checkout button, right? Where should the user click if they want to check out? Well, on the big ass checkout button we're going to create for them. So after the closing p tag and 3 closing divs with 3 more closing divs to go, this is where we're going to create one last div for this entire component. And that's going to get a class name of margin top 8, flex, a justify dash end, and lastly a padding bottom of 12. And inside of this div, let's open this up. We are going to create a button component. There we go. Inside of here, we're going to say check out and also include a little arrow right icon from Lucid React. and because that's gonna look a bit nicer. This icon will get a class name of height 4, a width 4, a margin left of 1.5, and lastly an inline. So it's gonna be in the same line as the checkout without using any kind of flex. And this button is going to get a class name of padding x4, on small devices a padding x of 6, and on large devices even more a padding x of 8. Awesome. So let's save that and let's see what this looks like. And the user should now, once we reload our page, or it automatically does it, have a big green button that's very obvious to see, where they can check out and complete their purchase. Beautiful. All right, dude. And kind of as a bonus, I guess you could call it, what we're gonna do right now is, before we actually implement the payments right here, I want to make this app look a lot better in about 5 minutes together with you. Because originally I planned to do this like in the very end of the app, but I think it does make sense to do now. So what we're gonna do to make this app look better is 3 things. We're gonna change the font of the app to look better. We're gonna change the background to have like a really nice grainy effect that's gonna look very high quality. And we're also going to implement loading states on the buttons. And the reason I want to do this now is just, honestly, I just appreciate you watching the video and following along. That's how it's possible to even do these videos, right? And to have people following along with them. And so I kind of want to do it right now so our app looks good while we do the rest of this app, while we implement the payments and so on. And I kind of forgot to do it at the very beginning. But I also think it's just a nice bonus for the people that actually stick around and watch the whole video to learn how to do it, and not just the people that only watch the intro and just want to grab everything and kind of run with it, but for people like you who actually want to watch the video and learn from the video and kind of follow along how I intend these videos to be, So I think it's gonna be cool if we just make our app look a lot better. And it's just going to take like 5 minutes, right? It's going to be pretty straightforward. So the first thing we're going to do is to change our font. And that's the easiest step. We're going to go into our main layout. And there's a really cool font that I found. And I want to show you this font. And that is called Recursive. There we go. And that also comes from next/font/Google, by the way. By the way, we can close out of a lot of these files. And if you're wondering where we are inside the root, let's give this more space, the root layout in source app. And damn, that is a huge phone in the small screen. And the root app and layout, that's where we are. We can simply import the recursive from next font Google and then simply call it recursive and use the recursive.classname cross or application. And if we reload our app, you're going to notice that changes the font to a font that I really like. So let's give this a second to reload. There we go. I think that font looks so nice, and I want to show you that font because I use it on my personal websites and I'm just a big fan, and I really hope you will enjoy it as well. Now, second step, what's gonna probably make the biggest difference is the grainy effect in the background. I think that's gonna be a really nice part of this kind of bonus, and we are gonna do that. There we go. Inside of our globals.css file, that is where we're gonna specify this grainy effect. Now, let's go to the very bottom and create a new class in here, and let's call it grainy-light. And we're going to address that class with the dot selector right here. Let's open this up, and what we're going to change in here is the background-image, and we're going to set that to a certain URL. Now, I've got this URL already prepared right here. So I'm just gonna paste this in. You are, of course, going to find this base64 encoded image in the copy paste list. So you don't have to type anything here out yourself. I'm gonna put the grainy light effect right here in the copy paste list, the URL that you just need to grab and paste in here as the background image. And we're gonna make use of this grainy light in our root layout as well, the file we already have open, and that's gonna be in our main tag right here. We can simply add the grainy-light class just like so and hit save. And let's see what that looks like. We can reload our page, and as you can see, that applied like a really subtle, nice gray kind of grainy effect to the background. And I think it's a nice little detail that makes the app feel a lot more high quality versus like a white background that we separate the grainy from the steps. And I think this looks so much nicer than having everything in white. It's like a very kind of faint grayish color. Technically, I did this with Tailwind's Gray 50 color, so it's a light shade of gray, and it looks really, really good. Just those two changes, right? The font and the grainy background make the app look so much nicer all of a sudden, and that's really what I wanted to show you. So thanks for following along, and I really hope you're gonna use this in your future apps as well, right? The font and the background, they're my favorite at the moment. This is probably my favorite style combo. I used this in an app I just launched, so kind of side fact right here, with a grainy background and the same font, and people really like this app, and I think in part it was because of the design choices there. But anyways, that's just my 2 cents. Now what we're going to implement a nice user interaction is the loading states for the button. So when you click a button and you are, for example, when the checkout is loading, right? When we click this button, there should of course be a loading state on that button. And doing that will happen inside of our button component. So we can simply pass it a prop. That's going to be the isLoading prop. And again, that is a huge phone. Wow. And that's going to be the, let's go into side by side, the isLoading prop that is going to create a loading state for this button. So let's navigate in here, and down here for the button, we are going to accept a new prop, and that is going to be the isLoading property right here that we can also now add as a custom prop for this button, because by default it doesn't take that, right? We can accept the isLoading prop, which is optional, so a question mark right here, and that's going to be a boolean. And while we're already here, we can also specify the loading text, also a custom property, optional, and that's going to be a string if we do decide to pass it. And then we can also destructure the loading text right here in our button. Great, now we simply need to use it, and in order to do that, let's self-close the comp that is already here, create a closing element for this comp that makes up our button, and now we can do a conditional check, basically inside of here, right? We're gonna check first things first. If isLoading is true and we have a loading text, so if both are passed, in that case we are going to render out the loading text here. Else, we're gonna render out the children. And why do we not have the children property accessible here? Do we still need to destructure that? Let's go into here. Let's destructure the children from the props. There we go. We can simply get them as properties and render them out right here. And then in the other case, where we are just loading, where is loading, in that case, we're going to render out some JSX. So let's just leave that at parentheses for now. And in the other case, we're going to leave this as null. Right, so what is the JSX that we want to render out? Basically, it's just going to be a span element. That's going to get a class name of margin left 1.5, flex items dash center, and a gap of 1. Let's open this span up, and inside of here will live 3 span elements. The first one is going to get a class name of animate dash flashing, and if we hover over this, you can see that nothing really happens, and that's because this is not actually a built-in class. So what we're doing with these 3 divs that we're going to create is a custom, really nice looking loading state. And in order to have this animation, we can simply head into our tailwind.config.ts that lives at the very root of our project. And this is a very, very simple animation we can add. Let's call it right here in our animation section of the Tailwind config, the flashing animation. And as a string, this is going to be flashing 1.4 seconds infinite linear. And we still need to define the keyframes for that. Let's do that right here under our marquee animation. The flashing is going to be very straightforward. It's just going to be an object, and the first key is going to be 0%, 100%, and that's going to be in object syntax and opacity of 0, and that is a string 0.2. And then the 20% of this, 20%, that is going to be again as an object the opacity of 1. So basically, and that 1 needs to be a string, we're saying from 0 to 20%, the animation should be very fast, right? From 0.2 to 1. And then the kind of out animation from 20% to 100 will be a bit slower, right? And that's how we achieve a really nice kind of staggering effect on this animation. And defining this animation in our Tailwind config already makes us able to actually use it right here in our span, as long as we save that, of course. The animate flashing is going to work. Let's give the span a width of 1, a height of 1, a BG of white, a rounded dash full, and inline block as the, what is that position? No, display, inline block. And this span can actually totally be self-closing. We're not gonna put any text in here, as this is already the loader that we want to have. Now we can copy and paste this down once and twice using Shift, Alt, and arrow down. And now to the second one, let's add a delay of, and we can choose from any delay that we want. We are gonna say 100 for the first span in here. And then let's give the second one a delay of 200. And that's gonna kind of stagger the animation. So the first one is gonna animate first, then the second one, then the third one. And all of this is only going to happen if we pass an isLoading state into this button. And just like that, we have created a beautiful loading state. Let's try that out. Right, so let's go back into our preview page, into our design preview component. If you're wondering where we are in the file tree, that's right here, configure, preview, design, preview. And let's just, for simplicity's sake, pass this button and isLoading of true that we have at the very bottom right here. Let's reload our page. And as you can see, beautiful, the loading state now shows up. And if we also define a loading text, let's just say loading as an example and hit save, you're gonna see it says loading, ... And now we could also disable the button, disable, whenever we are loading, because of course, and disabled. There we go. That's going to disable the button while it is loading, so the user is unable to interact with it. And just like that, whabam, we built like magic a beautiful, very subtle loading animation for a button. It's as easy as that, and that's massively going to improve the user experience throughout our app when buttons actually have loading states. Trust me, it makes a very big difference. These kind of tiny details like loading states, for example. Right? So how do we know when this button is loading? When should we actually display a loading state to this button? And the answer is that is actually going to come from React Query. Because if you remember what the goal is for this button, it's to create a payment session, right? We want to generate a URL that the user can use to pay for our phone case using Stripe, right? So we're going to do that with React Query. We're going to say const empty object is equal to use mutation. You've already learned what this is, right? This is to mutate data, to change data somewhere, in our case to generate a URL using Stripe. So the mutation key we're going to pass in here, what I told you about is used for caching and invalidation, is going to be get checkout session separated with hyphens. The mutation function, well, we don't have one yet, right? What should happen when the user wants to create a payment session? If you've never done this, strap in. We are going to create a payment session right now together using Stripe. And it's actually not nearly as complicated as you might think it is. To do this, we are going to go into our preview folder where we already are with this design preview component. And let's close out of some files here. And we're going to create a new file called actions.ts, just like before, remember? And in here we can say use server to only execute all functions, all RPC functions we have in here server side and never on the client. And from here we're going to say export const create checkout session, just a function we can call that will create a payment session for this user. And of course this needs to be equal to an async arrow function in this syntax right here. There we go. Okay, so we made a function called create checkout session, and this will receive only one parameter, and that's going to be the config ID. Right, so the identification of our current configuration, the user configuration, and we can inline type that. The config ID is going to be of type string to make TypeScript know what the hell this is, what we're working with inside of this function. Now, first things first, let's verify that this configuration exists by fetching it from the database. Let's say const configuration is going to be equal to await db. Let's import our database dot configuration dot find unique. And this, as always, takes a where argument, where the ID of the configuration that we are searching for matches the config ID that is passed as an argument into this function. Then, if we do not have a configuration, if whatever we passed in as a config ID doesn't exist in our database, in that case, we're gonna throw a new error, and this is gonna say no such configuration found. Now, a checkout session is always going to be user specific. We need to know which user purchased this item in order to be able to get their shipping address and so on, their email, and send it to them, right? We need to know the logged in user. And the way we do that is by using our auth provider. We can simply destructure something, we're going to worry about that later, from get kind server, and we might already be able to auto import this get kind server session. As easy as that, we know who is logged in into our app, right? We can simply destructure the get user function from here. And now to get the actual user object, we can say const user is equal to await get user. That's basically going to read the cookies that are attached to this API request and give us back the currently logged in user if there is one, right? If there is nobody logged in, this is going to be null. And in the case where they aren't logged in, if there is no user, well, that doesn't work. We're not going to create a payment session for you in that case. You need to be logged in, so we're going to throw a new error if there is no user saying you need to be logged in. There we go. After this guard clause, we always know that there will be a user 100%, because otherwise we wouldn't get to this point of the code. And we can also get access to the finish and the material of this configuration. Why do we need access to these? So we can let the user know how expensive this will be. We're going to create a payment session with exactly the amount of dollars that the user kind of chose for the base price and the textured finish and the polycarbonate, or the other option they have instead of the polycarbonate, right? We're gonna calculate how expensive this case will be server side. That's never something you want to receive from the client side, because the client can manipulate that and you could just send like $0 and the client wouldn't have to pay anything. We need to calculate the server side. And to do that, let's say let price is equal to base underscore price and import our base price, which is $14 for me in my example, and it might be different for you if you chose a different base price. And if the finish is triple equal to textured, in that case we want to add to the price. So we're going to say price plus equals product underscore prices. We're going to import that dot, and now you can probably guess we're going to check for the finish dot textured. Right? And similarly, if the material is triple equal to polycarbonate, let's check for that. So the premium option, we're going to add to the price server side as well. So we're going to add the product underscore prices dot material dot polycarbonate price, whatever we specify there. I believe it was like $5 and then $3 for the textured finish. And just like that, we have calculated our price. And if the user didn't choose any premium option, then the base price would be $14, right? Next up, we are gonna create the actual order. Now, what is an order? Well, basically, when the user buys something, we need to keep track of that in our database to know if they have paid, to know what exactly they ordered, what the amount was, what the shipping address is, and so on, right? So we need to get some data modeling done, and we're gonna create something called an order together in our Prisma schema. So let's switch over. Let's create a new model, and that's gonna be an order. And we're going to create one order each time someone buys something in our store. An order will be created in our database. Now, the ID of an order is going to be a string. It's going to be @ID, and at default, this is going to be a CUID, a collision-resistant unique identifier. The configuration ID is going to be a string, and we're actually going to link this to and string needs to be uppercase, and we're actually going to link this to a configuration, because one order will always have one configuration attached to it. You can't order something that is not a configuration. You always order the certain like image, how you dragged it, the color, and so on. All of that makes up a configuration. So we're gonna link that right here in our order as well. So the configuration for each order is gonna be of type configuration. And if we now format our file using Prettier, then the iteration is automatically going to be done for us by Prisma, or by Prettier, I guess, but for Prisma. How cool is that? We don't even need to worry about it, right? And if you're wondering what my shortcut is for formatting, it's Shift, Alt, and F to use Prettier to automatically do that. Beautiful. Okay, now we need the user who ordered from our store, and that's gonna be of type user. Now we don't have a type user, and that's probably one of the most important models in any application, the user model. So we still need to create that one. Let's create a model user right above our order, and each user will get an ID. That's gonna be a string, and basically same thing, at ID, at default, CUID, collision resistant unique identifier. There we go. The email we want to keep track of for each user, that's going to be a string. And lastly, we're going to keep track of the created at value. When was this entry created in our database? That's going to be a date time, an internal, or like a built-in rather, data type that we can use in Prisma. And at default, that's going to be right now. And the updated at property, we're also going to keep track of that, is a date time and at updated at. Beautiful. Okay, so this just contains when this entry in our database was last updated, and that can sometimes be really handy. So we always want to keep track of that as well, along with the created at. Awesome. So that means we can now link each order to the user that made it. And that's very, very important. So we know the email, for example, that the user has that ordered this product, so we can send them like shipping information, or if anything goes wrong, we know their email to reach out to them and so on. You always want to associate an email with a purchase in any app, basically. We also want to keep track of the amount, and that's going to be a float. That's going to be how large is the purchase price for this order. In our case, in this case, $22. That's going to be the amount. We're going to keep track of an is paid, and that's going to be a Boolean. And by default, this is going to be false. So that's just going to be, is this order actually paid? Did Stripe verify that the user has actually paid the money? You're going to see exactly why this is so helpful later. We're also going to keep track of the status, and we've already created the enum, and that's going to be called the order status. You remember when we did that? Let's see. Let's go up to the order status. That's either going to be fulfilled, shipped, or awaiting shipment. Those are going to be the possible statuses for our order. Next up, we need to know the shipping address. Where should this case be sent? And to do that, we're going to do that inside of a separate model called shipping address. There we go. Let's open this up, and this is going to get an ID that's going to be of type string, and at ID at default CUID. And all this does is that whenever we create a new entry, Prisma does the ID generation for us, and we don't need to worry about it. Basically, it's just easier. Each shipping address will have a name, and that's gonna be a string, a street, and that's gonna be a string, a city, string. All of these are gonna be a string. So I'm not even gonna say string anymore. Just assume that all of the following will be a string, right? Postal code, string, then a country, then a state, also a string, but this time this is going to be optional, because state is, sometimes you don't get that information, but as long as you have all the other ones, you're good, right? You can still ship. So we're going to make this optional just in case. The phone number, same thing. This is going to be a string, but optional. The user doesn't really have to pass it. And lastly, we're going to link this to the orders, and this is just going to be an order array. So one shipping address can receive multiple orders, right? If you order 5 products from my store, then your one shipping address has 5 orders associated with it. And similarly, that's also automatically going to create the relation in our order for us. However, what we do want to change is let's make the shipping address lowercase. I just kind of prefer it. Prisma by default makes it uppercase. I'm not really a fan of that. So let's change the shipping address to lowercase, but it really doesn't matter. It's just personal preference. And let's copy down using Shift Alt arrow down the shipping address, bam, and rename this model to the billing address. Because what's very possible is that the billing address is different than the shipping address, but essentially contains all the same data, right? So still ID, name, street, city, and so on. Nothing changes about the data, except that we now, when we format our file, also get a billing address relation in our order model, right? And I'm also just going to change the b to lowercase, just personal preference again. I think it's nicer. And lastly, we also want to keep track of when an order was created. So we're going to add a created add property at the very bottom, date, time, add default now, just like before. And then similarly, the updated add that we also keep track of as a date time. And this is going to be add updated add. So Prisma automatically keeps track of when this entry was updated and adds this row accordingly, or updates this row accordingly, right? Beautiful. So just like that, we have modeled a complete order system for our database with an isPaid property. And that's going to be really important because we only ever want to ship something if we are 100% sure the user actually paid, if we actually got the money. So this won't come from the user, but from Stripe or payment provider. So we are actually sure that we have received the money. Now to sync our remote database, as always, we're going to say npx prisma db push. That's going to push our changes into remote. And that should only take a second. And we are up to date. Great. Awesome. So what that now means is we can continue in our create checkout session action, right? So let's go into kind of side by side here. There we go. Nice. So when we click this button, this function will be executed, creating the payment session for the user. And what we first want to check before creating a new order for this user is there already an order for this configuration? Because if there is, then we don't need to create a new one, right? That just doesn't make sense. So we're going to create a let order, and this will be of type order that we get from Prisma. And if we reload the window, then hopefully Prisma will automatically let us import this type. And if not, then we need to manually import it. And this type exists because we just created our model called order, and that will automatically create the TypeScript types for us, which is really nice in Prisma. Great, that worked. We can also import this. Or this could be undefined, and we're going to default it to undefined, right? Because we're going to do a conditional check right now. This conditional check will be based on if we have an order or not. So let's check. Let's say const existing order is going to be equal to await db.order.find first. Which order do we want to find? Where? Well, we don't know the ID of the order that we want to find, right? So we can't search by the ID, but what we do know is the user ID, right? Because we're linking a user to an order. That is going to be the logged in user ID, and also the configuration ID we know, which is the configuration.id from above, right? And based on these two, we can actually uniquely identify an order based on configuration and user. Awesome. So we now know if there is already an order for this exact configuration that the user chose with these exact finishes and the image and so on, or not. And if there is, if we have an existing order, in that case, we're going to set the order to that existing order. We don't need to create a new order. That's the entire point of this check. And else, if there's no order for this yet, well, in that case, we can create a new one. Let's say in that case, order is equal to await db.order.create, and we're going to create it with a data object, and that's going to be first of the amount, which is going to be our price divided by 100. Then the user ID is going to be our user.id, so the logged in user. And lastly, the configuration ID is going to be equal to our configuration.id that we also already know. Now, TypeScript is complaining here. What's the problem? Type amount number user ID is not assignable to type without property status is missing in type. Okay, so what we probably forgot to do is to not give this a default value. If we go into our order and then the status right here, yes, that's exactly the problem. And we did not give this a default value. So right now it's asking us to, hey, please provide a value for the status. You need to do that. Other ones are all optional. But of course, the default status should be the, well, let's choose, let's look at it. Should it be fulfilled? Should it be shipped? Should it be awaiting shipment? Well, of course, it's not shipped yet. It's not fulfilled yet. It should be awaiting shipment by default, right? So we can simply give our status for the order a default, and that's going to be awaiting, and we can auto complete this to awaiting shipment. And then also don't forget to npx prisma db push. That's going to push our changes into remote, and it's also going to generate our TypeScript types locally. At least it does it sometimes. Just to make sure, I'm going to restart my window using Shift Control and P and then saying developer reload window. And with that, we definitely get the newest TypeScript types, and we can continue in creating the payment session. And as you'll notice, now TypeScript is happy and Prisma is happy. We don't need to pass anything else. We just assign the result of this operation to our order that we are keeping track of. Great. And now is the time to actually make the payment session. To do that, we're gonna use a tool called Stripe. Oops, not Stripped, Stripe. Stripe is a payment provider. It's great. The developer experience is awesome. Let me just show you how to do it. In our project, let's clear the terminal. Let's install a new package, and that is the Stripe SDK. Let's install npm install Stripe. It's probably, if we take a look at Stripe on npm while that installs, gonna have a lot of weekly installs. It's very well maintained. Let's take a look at how many people use this. 1.7 million. Yeah, that's pretty solid, man. And we can simply go ahead to Stripe, log in, and we're gonna need our Stripe API key in order to do this. So if you don't have an account with Stripe yet, that's of course totally free. There we go. And once we are logged in, we can actually grab our API key from here. So we can simply enter API key in the search bar. Stripe is extremely good when it comes to developer experience. And that's one of the things they do the best, right? Their documentation is great. And so is their search bar. So we can simply go to developers API keys, and this is where you can grab your secret standard key. If you don't have one yet, simply create one. You can click create like a standard key. I've already did this. So my key is gonna be right here. Or maybe, yeah, I think you don't even have to create one. I think this is gonna be here by default. You can simply click reveal test key, and I'm just gonna do that. I'm just gonna change it after this video. So let's grab our secret key. We're actually gonna need that, and then we can use that in our app. This is what we're gonna use to safely interact with the Stripe payment service. So with this secret key copied to our clipboard, let's head into our .env file, and we can put it in here as the Stripe _ secret _ key, and just paste the secret we just grabbed from Stripe. And now to make working with Stripe just a bit easier, we're going to create a little helper, and that helper is going to live in source, then in lib, and let's create a new file here called stripe.ts, just a little Stripe helper, where we can import Stripe from Stripe, the package we just installed, and then export a const Stripe, which is going to be equal to a new Stripe, which is a class, and in the constructor we're going to pass the process.env.stripe secret key that we just pasted into our .env, or we can do nullish coalescence with an empty string just so TypeScript is happy, because by default this could be undefined, right? And TypeScript is like, hey, this can't be undefined, this always needs to be a string. So to make TypeScript happy, if this is undefined or null, then in that case we're just going to pass an empty string in here. And then TypeScript won't be mad at us. And then as the configuration, we're going to pass as an object in here, the API version is going to be, and we get full type safety here. Wow, that is pretty good. And then TypeScript, let's set that to true, because hell yeah, we are working in TypeScript. And then we can close out of that Stripe file. And that's literally all we need to do. As easy as that. Stripe integration done. We can now use it. First off, to create this payment session, we need to know which product is the user buying. And to let Stripe know what the product is, let's create one. Let's say const product is gonna be equal to await Stripe dot, and we still need to import Stripe from the helper we just created, dot full type safety, by the way, awesome, products dot create. So this is an API that's kind of similar to Prisma, right? I mean, look at this, DB order create, Stripe products create. That's pretty familiar. Nice. The name is going to be custom iPhone case, and this is actually going to show up in the purchase menu for the user. The images are going to be just the configuration.image URL. So this is the image that the user uploaded originally. They can see it in the kind of checkout page. I just think it's a nice little detail. And the default _price _data, we're gonna pass in here, well, we basically define the currency and how much the product costs, right? So the currency is gonna be USD, And the unit amount will actually control how expensive this product is. And since we already calculated that way up here, where was it? With the price, we can simply use that, right? We know the price is correct. We calculated it server side. That's very important, as I mentioned earlier. This cannot come from the client. And we can simply use that price. And that's actually going to be the price that the user now pays in Stripe, right? And with that product, we are all ready to create the actual payment session. And we do that by saying const Stripe session is going to be equal to await Stripe dot checkout dot sessions. Let's just get some autocomplete here. Dot create. Again, very nice API. This feels like writing Prisma, to be honest. And we're going to pass a bunch of configuration stuff in here. For example, the success underscore URL. Where should the user be redirected when they actually paid, when we receive the money? In that case, we're going to send them to the, as a template string, dynamically insert the process.env.next public server URL separated by underscores, right? We can simply change that in our env config later and the user will be sent there. So this is going to be either like localhost or later or deployed version of this app, right? /thank-u and then question mark order ID is equal to the dynamic order.id. Right? And that's how we can fetch that order on the thank you page and actually check, has the user paid for this or not? And the cancel underscore URL is going to be, let's just copy and paste the success URL right down here. The cancel URL is simply going to be a bit different, /configure /preview question mark. So as a query parameter, ID is equal to the configuration.id. So if for any reason the user decides to cancel and click on the back button on the Stripe payment session, then they are just redirected to the configuration screen where they can drag around their image, right? So the progress is not lost for them. We don't want to lose that customer. As the payment method types, we can pass in, there we go, payment method types, whatever we want to allow, right? There's a lot to choose from. You decide what you want to allow. Basically, the most standard options that we want to go for are both card and also PayPal we want to allow. And that's the payment methods that the user can actually pay with. As the mode, we're going to say payment. Alternative would be something like subscription. We don't care about that. The shipping underscore address underscore collection is very important. We need to know the shipping details. So for the allowed countries, we can pass in here. This is basically a list of all the countries you allow to ship to. So people from these countries can order from you. Just as an example, we're going to use DE and we're also going to use US. Of course, all other country codes are literally supported here. That Stripe supports. So you choose your country, whatever you're from, USA, India, Germany, wherever you're from, doesn't matter, and put it here, and all the other countries that are allowed to check out from you. As the metadata, we are going to put an object, and the user ID is going to be the user.id, and the order ID is going to be the order.id. This is very important. And you know why? Because whenever we get a webhook, we're going to get to that later, don't worry about it for now. Whenever we get a webhook from Stripe telling us that a checkout was successful, Stripe verified that they have received the money and the user actually paid, then we need to know which user was this and which order was this for. Which order do we now actually need to ship? Right? That's very important that we pass the metadata. And now to tell Stripe what the actual products are that the user is even buying, well, we already created the product. We just need to use it. And we do that inside of the line underscore items. This is what the user is actually buying. This takes an array of objects where the price is going to be the product.default underscore price as a string. We're going to cast that to make TypeScript happy, and then the quantity is going to be hard-coded to 1 because the user probably only wants to buy one case, right? If you wanted to, you can implement a functionality where they can buy multiple, but who wants to buy multiple of the same cases, right? I just put this as 1. I think it makes more sense. And then we're simply going to return from this function as the URL the Stripe session.url. What is the URL? Basically, it's a hosted checkout page by Stripe. And if we now put the user to this URL, if we push this into their browser, they're going to be on the hosted Stripe checkout page that is secure, where all the payment is all handled for us, right? So we don't need to have in mind any security stuff. Great. Very, very nice. This is the logic to create a payment checkout session. And we can simply now use this function in or use mutation right here, right, as the mutation function, and import that. Great. Now, what should happen on success if the URL creation was successful? This doesn't mean that the user has paid yet. This simply means that Stripe has created a session for the user in which they are able to pay, right? This doesn't mean that the user already paid. In any case, we receive the URL. We can destructure in the callback function. And why? Well, because we returned the URL from our action, right? We return something called the URL, and because this is fully type safe, we know this URL will be on the front end. And if we have this URL, that's going to be the URL of the hosted checkout page. Well, we simply want to push the user to that URL. And in order to do that, we need access to the router, right, to push something into the URL. So at the very top, we're going to say const router is equal to use router. And that, as always, comes from next/navigation. We can simply import that. And now if we have the URL, we're going to say router.push URL. There we go. And else, right, what should happen if the URL is not present? Because this could be null. It's probably not going to be, but just to make TypeScript happy and for any eventualities, we're going to say else throw new error. And this is going to say unable to retrieve payment URL, period. And now where do we catch this error? This happens in the onError property. This takes a callback function as well. And this is our place to inform the user that, hey, something went wrong and please try again, right? And in here, we're going to render out a toast notification, which also means we need to destructure at the very top the toast from our use toast hook, right? And simply invoke that. That allows us to actually render out toast notifications on the screen right now. And we're going to do that in or on error. So we're going to call the toast function. And the title of this error toast is going to be something went wrong. The description of the toast is going to be there was an error on or end. Please try again. Right? So the user doesn't think they're stupid, right? The problem is on our side. And they should probably just try again, and it might just work. And then the variant is going to be destructive, of course, to let the user know, hey, something went wrong here, right? And now to call this, to make this entire thing happen, we can simply destructure the mutate, what's actually going to invoke the entire flow we defined right here from our use mutation. And let's rename it, because mutate is not a great name for this. Let's say create payment session, because that's exactly what it does. I think it's much more concise, and we can actually use that now in our JSX. So just for demonstration, let's already try this. Let's create a payment session whenever we click the button at the bottom right here, right? So on click of this button, we are just going to invoke the function of create payment session, and then all the rest should hopefully be handled for us. And of course, this create payment session expects the config ID, because that's what we receive as a parameter in our create checkout session, right? So we need to pass it as an argument wherever we call the function. And this is nothing else than the configuration.id. There we go, right? So what is the configuration? Well, that's the prop we receive in the design preview from the server, right? From the server-side component into the client-side component that we are currently in. Beautiful. Let's try this out. This should work now. Let's give our application a lot more space to work with here. Let's go into our network or console, refresh that, or clear it rather. And let's try this out. Let's hit the checkout button. What we expect to happen is we are redirected to Stripe to actually pay $22. Let's try it. Wow, that was fast. All right, something went wrong. Well, what is the problem? Message, you need to be logged in. All right, of course, we are not logged in. That's why we can't do this. Well, let's log in for a second. And trust me, we're going to do a bit of nicer logic here in a minute. I just want to verify with you together that the payment actually works as we expected. And then in a minute, we can worry about the login actually looking good, right? So I'm gonna enter my hello@joshtriedcoding.com email. That's gonna send us an email. There we are. I just received the email. Let's paste in the code and let's hit continue. Beautiful. So now we are logged in. Let's click create case. And of course, we're gonna have some logic where if a configuration is already created, you're gonna not be sent to the landing page, right, but to that configuration. So you don't need to do everything again. But since we don't have that logic in place yet, let me just upload an image right here. That's gonna take us through the entire flow once again. And I mean, that's also just good to verify that everything is working, right? Just to be really sure. And we can also see the gradient, or the grainy effect rather, in the background. It looks really nice. Awesome. Let's just kind of put our image on the phone case. You choose any image from your PC. And I'm just going to go with soft polycarbonate. I'm just going to go with one option. That's going to be $19. We're going to verify that in our payment session. And let's also go for an iPhone 15. All right. By the way, I don't actually have an iPhone 15, but it doesn't really matter. Let's just pretend I do. Let's click continue. Oh, and one thing we also need to do is add the loading state for this button right here. That's going to be a very nice detail as well. We're not going to forget to do that. We're going to do that. It's going to be very simple. And then once that's done, we should land on the preview page. Awesome. Your iPhone 15 case based on what we just chose. Awesome. The image is right here. This looks so nice, man. Honestly, wow. Very, very nice page. All the highlights, materials. Perfect. Now let's click create checkout, and now let's see what happens. What we expect to be sent to is the Stripe page where we can actually buy the product. Let's hit checkout. And why did this not work? What's the problem now? Message undefined reading find first. Interesting. So it's complaining. This seems to be an error from Prisma in our action file, that the find first cannot be executed. So it can't find the order. Did we not push or changes? No, that's weird. Let's quickly verify that that this table actually exists. Why can it not do that? That should totally work. Let's head into neon.tech and let's verify that we have the table. There should be an order table right here. Query completed with no result. Yeah, that's fine because there is no order yet. All right, this makes so much sense. Okay, so here's the problem. So the user we created in our database, the ID was automatically created by Prisma, right? That's not what we want. That's not gonna be realistic. We get our user ID from Kind, from our auth provider, right? So all I did was go into the actions and actually log out these values to see what's happening if any of those are undefined. And now I know what's the problem. This user ID, so whatever Kind generated for us. So if you want, just go ahead and log out this user ID, click the button again. That's gonna log out your user ID that Kind gave you for your email that you are logged in with in the console. And that is exactly what the user ID needs to be in our database. How did I not notice that? All right. Let's save that. Let's change the ID to the Kind user ID. And then let's try that again, because essentially what's happening is that the user ID doesn't exist. This user ID property did not exist in our database as long as it doesn't match the actual logged in user, right? So let's try this again. And I mean, this should work, right? Let's check out again. Let's click this button. No, you can't. Okay, but that's a different. Hey, that's a different error. We're making very good progress. Invalid URL undefined. Okay, that's actually an expected error, and that's a good error. And I want to tell you why, dudes. We are already at the point where this is a good error. But as you'll notice, in software development, if you get different errors, that's very good progress, because this is an error. I can tell you exactly why it happens, and it's the best error to get. So all we're missing is inside of our action, it's complaining that this environment variable doesn't exist. And of course it doesn't, because we never defined it, but nothing more simple than that. We simply need to define a variable with this name, right? So let's copy the next public server URL, paste it in our .env file. And this is simply going to be http://localhost 3000. There we go. And then we can hit save. Awesome. All All right, that is automatically going to reload our Next.js development server. It says reload env right here. And after that's done, great, we can simply try this again. And now that should really work. So let's hit checkout. That is going to do some stuff here. No error, post, configure. Beautiful. And we are forwarded to the Stripe checkout page. Nice. I'm very happy that worked. How did I not notice that, man? Anyways. All right. I'm glad we got that fixed. Now we know that the checkout session was created successfully. Beautiful. We can close out of our Prisma Studio. Remember to just change this to your actual logged in user that we get from Kind. Awesome. And now that gives us all the options to actually pay for our service. And because we are in Stripe test mode, we can simply enter some dummy information here. So for the shipping address, we're going to say example town. The address is going to be, yeah, it's already has some stuff here selected for me, some random stuff that I already typed in. So I'm just going to use that. You type in, I don't know, your address or any random address. It doesn't really matter. As the card, we're going to use a Stripe test card. That's going to be 42424242424242. So a bunch of 42s. That's just it. Then any date in the future for the date, and then any CVC. It doesn't matter. And this is a Stripe test card. So this will always work as long as we are in test mode, right? This is a card that is prepared by Stripe. That we can simply use to test our payment system before actually going live, right? So we don't have to use our actual credit card in order to test if the payments are working correctly. Nice. And now we are redirected to the thank you page. Exactly what we expect to happen, because that is our success URL. We are redirecting the user to localhost 3000, or in production, this is going to be a different URL, /thank-you, and then the order ID is attached right here. So in our case, that is right here, up in the URL that we can now read on the page that we were sent to. Beautiful. We know that payment system works perfectly. Now, the only thing that's not optimal right now is that we had to go ahead and create a user ourselves, right? We don't really want to do that. And a much better way is to do everything through one site in our app. So what's going to happen? Let's take a look at how this is going to work architecturally. Right, let's give this a lot more space, because again, I want you to understand why we're doing what we're about to do. So what we're going to do is something called an auth callback. And maybe that sounds a bit abstract if you're not familiar with what that means, but let's take a look at what this means step by step. So what's going to happen is that the user will get a pop-up, and that's going to ask them to please log in. Where is this going to happen? This is going to happen right before they check out, because in order for the user to check out, we want them to be logged in. And on this pop-up, they will either have the option to log in if they already have an account. So, let's say login. Or in the other case, where they don't have an account with us yet, if they're a first-time customer, it's going to say sign up or register, whatever you want to call it, right? And if they click on the login button, basically what's going to happen is that first things first, we want to save their configuration, right? Because they're going to be taken to a different page once they click the login. They're going to be taken to our authentication provider to log in, that is Kind, right? And through that page change, normally all the progress in their configuration, how they dragged around their image and stuff would completely get lost, right? That is horrible. We don't want that. Therefore, the user should continue right where they left off after they log in, right on the checkout page of their order. And doing that is actually really easy. We can simply store their configuration ID that we do already save in local storage, and then get it from local storage once the user is back on our page. So once the user gets back to our own page, let's just say our page, we can simply check, is there a configuration ID in local storage, which is just browser side, client side storage on the user's browser, like in Chrome, for example. And if there is, we can simply redirect them to it, so they continue right exactly where they left off. And same thing for the sign up, right? This is also going to take the user to Kind. And why can I not? Damn, dude, sometimes Excalibur is seriously weird. Why does this? Anyways, whatever, man. All right, let's copy and paste over this entire arrow, then doesn't matter. They're also going to be taken to kind in the sign up step. They're also going to land on our page after they're done. And basically same thing. We're also going to put their configuration ID in local storage, so the user can check out right away once they're back on our page and logged in. Right, so doing this conceptually, it sounds pretty simple. If you just ignore that this looks kind of horrible because my diagram skills are pretty bad, this is basically all that's happening. User logs in, lands back on our page. We check if they already have a configuration, and if they do, we redirect them, right? It's pretty simple. So let's go ahead and go implement that together. And as you'll see in code, this is also not hard. So in our app folder, this is where we're gonna create a new folder, and we're gonna call that folder auth-callback and hit enter. And in here, we're gonna create a page.tsx that's gonna define the content that is shown on the auth callback page. As always, no surprises here. That's gonna be an arrow function that doesn't return an array. There we go. And we're gonna export default page at the very bottom. Beautiful. Now, this page is going to be client side. We're going to make use of React query inside of here. So we're going to mark this as a client side component. Now, you know what? I think before we continue on this page, it makes a bit more sense to actually implement this login modal first, so you understand this page a bit better. Yeah, I think that makes more sense. So let's save this for now. We're going to get back to here in like 5 or 10 minutes. We're going to get right back. First things first, let's go into our design preview component. So in our file tree, that's under configure, preview, design preview right here. Because the big thing we're doing here that's not ideal is that at the create payment session right here, we are directly calling this function when clicking back down here, the checkout button, right? We're immediately creating the payment session, even if, and that's the important part, even if the user is not logged in. And that's not ideal. We want the user to be logged in before they can purchase something. So instead, we're going to create a function down here, and we're going to call this handle checkout. And this is simply going to be a arrow function, and the logic in here is going to be extremely straightforward. We're simply going to do a check. If we have the user, in that case, and don't worry, we're going to get the user here in a second. If we have the user, then we want to create the payment session. Let's just put that as a comment for us so we don't forget this. And else, right, conceptually, what should happen if the user is not logged in? Well, they need to log in, of course, right? And now, very important, before we prompt the user to actually log in, let's save their current configuration. Let's go back here. Let's click back. Can we go back to our configuration? Yes, we can. We want to save exactly the kind of where they drag the image and which options they chose, which color they chose, and so on, right? So that's not lost. And to do that, I just mentioned how to do it. We're going to say local storage.set item. That's how we can put something in local storage. And we're going to call this the configuration ID. And this is going to be the ID. Now, where does this ID come from? Well, basically just from the configuration that is passed in here as a prop from our server, right? We can simply destructure the ID from that configuration at the very top of the file. There we go. And if we spelled that right, that would actually work. That's how we get access to the current configuration ID that we can now simply store in the user's browser, right? Awesome. That's how we keep track of that. And now, how do we know when a user is logged in or not? Well, very simple. Our authentication provider provides us the necessary hook for that. So we can simply destructure the user from, and that's going to be called useKind browser client. And we can go ahead and import that. Well, the auto import doesn't seem to work. All right, let's manually import it. Maybe for you, the auto import works. I don't know. Sometimes for me, it doesn't. We're going to say useKind browser client and import that from @kindoss/kind auth next.js. There we go. That's the client side hook, and we still need to invoke that function. There we go. And now we either have the kind user if the user is logged in, or null if the user is not logged in, right? Which is a totally valid case as well. That's why we even have this if statement down here. Now, what should happen if the user does need to log in? Well, in that case, we want to open that like modal, that kind of pop-up that we talked about to ask them to please log in, right? How are we going to do that? Well, basically, we're going to keep track of a state. So let's go to the very top and let's declare a state right here. And we're going to say const is login modal open, very clear name as to what this is for, right? And set is login modal open. And this is going to be equal to use state, right? And by default, this is going to be false. Of course, we don't want the model to be open. And just because I like it as a personal preference, I'm going to put Boolean in here into the state, and we forgot to do it here as well. I'm going to put it here. Once again, you don't have to do this, but I just think it's a kind of cool, I just like it. I just think it looks nice. All right, and then we're going to set the modal to open in the case that the user does need to log in, right? So we're simply opening the modal, and if the user is already logged in, we can basically just do everything as before. The user is totally fine to actually create the payment session to actually check out, and as the config ID this takes, we're going to pass in the, or actually we can just pass in directly the ID that we destructured from our configuration, right? So nothing really changes in this case, only if the user is not logged in. In that case, we want to ask them to. Now, to actually show that modal, well, that modal doesn't exist, so we need to create it. First off, let's determine where it will be shown, and that's gonna live right here below this first div element. This is where the login modal, a component that doesn't quite exist yet, is going to live, and it's going to be self-closing as well. Beautiful. So let's go ahead and create that login modal, and that's gonna live in source components, new file, login modal.tsx right here. All right, and let's say const login modal. Once again, no surprises, this is just a regular arrow function that we export default at the bottom, login modal, and this is going to return something called a dialog. Now, if we try to import this, then we could, right? Headless UI does have a dialog, but a much nicer version of the dialog is provided by shadcn UI, and that's not the dialog. It's not the alert dialog, it's the regular dialog. And if we click that, you can see what happens. It's kind of this pop-up style that we are exactly going for. Fully accessible. If you press escape or click outside of it, it closes. That is exactly what we want. So let's install that one. Let's go ahead and stop our Prisma Studio. We don't need that anymore. And say npx shadcn-ui at latest add dialog, and then hit enter. That's going to install the component into our local project right here, so we can simply go ahead and then import it from, there we go, that's done, from our ./ui/dialog, and go ahead and import that. Beautiful. Okay, now to make this dialog control, to know when it's open and when it's not open, that information actually comes from our parent, right? The parent determines when should this be open versus not, as the isLogin modal open state, right? So we simply need to pass that in as properties to make this dialog controlled by the parent. So we can simply accept two props in here, the isOpen and also the set isOpen. And because this is very simple, we can simply inline these types. The isOpen is gonna be a Boolean, and the set isOpen is going to be a bit of a different type. This is the type of the React state setter. And I already memorized this, but if we hover over this, we can see the full type right here is this. It's dispatch set state action Boolean. So we can simply grab that, copy it, or kind of type it out ourselves. That's totally fine as well. And paste it here as the property type. And then simply import both the dispatch and the set state action types from React. And because, fun fact, we're only importing types, we can also annotate this with type at the start, and that's gonna basically tree shake this to make our module smaller. Because if we didn't include the type, you could see that we actually have some import cost right here of 4.1K, versus if we add the type, then this is only gonna exist at design time and will be stripped at build time. You know, because TypeScript doesn't exist in runtime. Okay, so now we have the isOpen and the set isOpen property. We can simply pass them into our dialog right away. So on open change, we're gonna say set isOpen, and the open state is going to be isOpen. Just pass that into our dialog right away. Beautiful, that's all the logic already done. now we can get to the actual JSX. What do we want to show in this modal? First off, we're going to render out the dialog content that is provided to us by our UI library. And let's give this a class name, and that's going to be a absolute and a z index of, in angle brackets for a custom value, just a bunch of 9s, just very high. This should be above everything else, right? Inside of here goes a dialog header. Let's import that. And inside of here goes a div element with a class name, and that's going to be relative mx auto, a width of 24, a height of 24, and a margin bottom of 2. And inside of here lives a next.js image element that we can simply import from next/image. This is going to be self-closing, and this is basically going to be an image of a snake, right? It's going to look pretty nice. So the source for this image is going to be /snake-1.png. The alt is going to be just snake image. The class name is going to be object-contain. And lastly, we're going to apply a fill property to this image as well. Now, before we continue in the login modal, let's already see if this works, right? Let's give this a bit more space. Let's save the login modal and now also import that, of course, in our design preview. Now this expects the two properties that we set in the login modal. So the isOpen that it expects, right? These two at once. The isOpen is simply going to be or isLogin modal open. And the set isOpen that this expects is going to be the set isLogin modal open. So basically we're straight passing in the state setter into the login modal to make it controlled by the parent element. And if we now click checkout and we are not logged in, so let's sign out of our account by clicking the sign out button up here. And that sometimes takes really long in development mode, especially if you have a 7-year-old PC. There we go. Okay, we're logged out. And now if we hit the, oh no, one thing we still need to change. We actually need to say handle checkout wherever we have the button, right? Currently, we're still creating the payment session. When we click the button, that's not what should happen. Instead, we need to now call our handle checkout function. Very important. Save that, reload our page, and now we're actually making use of our logic that we wrote right here in the handle checkout. Now, once that's done loading, once we click the checkout button, what we expect to happen is for a modal to pop up. Beautiful. And it has the little snake in there. Awesome. So we can see what we're doing in real time. Let's close out of some of this and continue in our login modal because we already know this works now. Nice. Now, below the div element that contains the image, this is where we're going to create the dialog title. Also import that from our UI library. And this dialog title is going to get a class name of text3xl, text center, font-bold, a tracking-tight, and lastly a text gray of 900. Awesome. And the text we're going to put inside of here is going to be login to continue. Awesome. Hit save on that. Now, if we go below our dialog title, this is where we're going to put our dialog description and also import that from our UI library. Now, this dialog description will also get a class name. And that class name is going to be a text of base, a text center, and a padding y of 2. And inside of here, we're going to put a span element with a class name of font medium and a text zinc of 900. And inside of the span element, we're going to say your configuration was saved, exclamation point, to make it very clear to the user that, hey, no progress is being lost. Because by default, you're going to be a little bit annoyed when you see a pop up to ask you to log in, right? That's just a little bit annoying. So we want to make very sure that the user knows, hey, your configuration was saved. No progress at all is being lost here. Now we're going to insert a JavaScript space after that to maintain one spacebar. And then we're going to say, please log in or create an account to complete your purchase, period. Awesome. And that's most of the logic done. We can save that. And now we only want to offer like two buttons, either to log in or to sign up, because that's what we put earlier here. Remember, if we go kind of back a bit, then yeah, right here was the sign up button. Let's get rid of some of this stuff. the login and the sign up is what we want to offer to the user, right? So let's do that. That's going to happen below our dialog header and still inside of the dialog content. This we're going to create one more div with a class name, and that's going to be grid calls of 2, a gap of 6, a divide -x, and a divide gray of 200. Let's open this div up, and the first thing we're going to put in here is the login link. Let's import that from kind or authentication provider, and that's basically a button that takes the user to the login page for us. All done, right? Inside of her, we're going to say login, and this will also get a class name just to make it look good, and that's going to be dynamic. Inside of here, we're going to use our button variants. So basically, we can make this look like a button without it actually being a button. But we can still benefit from the beautiful built-in colors of our UI library by using the button variants function that we import, by the way, if you're wondering, from the same button component that we have, right? And this takes the variant, and let's define this as the outline variant. So it's going to look like the outline button pretty much. And now, right below the log link, we're going to create the register link. You can probably imagine what this does, right? And where we import this from, also from kind OSS, kind auth Next.js. And this will simply take the user to the register page, the sign up page. So the class name will also be dynamic. We're going to apply the button variants just the same as for the login link. And the variant that we want to pass in here is going to be the default variant. Awesome. And let's also say sign up inside of the register link. So TypeScript is happy because this now has a child element. Awesome. Okay, and the font case, it looks a bit big. Maybe we need to fix that later. Anyways, let's go into side by side, and we can see login to continue. We have the login option, we have the sign up option, and this just looks super professional, man. With a snake, the kind of ratios of the font sizes and the font weights, and oh, this looks so good. Nice. So we can now log in, we can sign up, and if we actually hit them, then you're going to be able to see something very cool, and that is how we put the configuration ID into local storage. So I want to show you what that looks like. So we can actually see the local storage is a browser side thing. If we go into application and then into local storage, this is where a lot of stuff already lives. Let's clear out of all of this. And we can now simply try this again. Let's click the checkout button, and that's going to put right there. Did you see the configuration ID appearing? Let's try that again. Bam, right here, it just appeared again, the configuration ID into our local storage, which is right here under storage, right? And that's how we kind of save the progress that the user has made, because this is the actual database ID, remember? And now if the user logs in, what do we want to happen? Well, basically, we want to send them to something called the auth callback, right? So our page is going to be the auth callback, what we kind of got started in creating earlier. That's gonna be the auth callback. And the only purpose, again, of this auth callback page is to get the local storage and see if we need to redirect the user back to where they were or not. Right? That's literally, it's a kind of just a fancy name, the auth callback, for a redirect page, because that's all it is, right? We're checking, is there something in local storage? And if there is, redirect the user to this exact page that they are on right now. And if there's not, then the user is just trying to log in from like the landing page or something maybe. And in that case, we don't need to redirect the user, right? That's exactly what the auth callback is for. And we're gonna go ahead into our auth callback page and actually make that happen, because as you'll see, it's really not hard. So the first thing we want to do is to actually see if there is something in local storage. That's the first course of action. The way we do that is going to be in React state. Let's define a config ID and a set config ID right up here at the top of our page component. And this is going to be equal to use state. We can simply import that from React. And as TypeScript, this will either be string or null. And we're going to default it to null, right? Because chances are a config ID either does exist in local storage, or it's also very possible that it doesn't, right? And we're handling both cases right here. So to actually check if it is in local storage, we're going to do that inside of use effect. It's very important that we do this inside of use effect to kind of manage side effects, because at the very first initialization of the component, that might not actually be defined, the local storage, right? This might be undefined. So let's say const configuration ID is gonna be equal to local storage dot get item, and we're gonna get the configuration ID. And if we hover over local storage, you can see the type of it is storage. If you want further information, you can go to the MDN reference, right? We don't really care about it. All we do care about is that we get the same key, the configuration ID, that we set in our design preview, right? It's this one. These two need to match, and they do, right? If you're just following along with the video. But just for your understanding, we need to retrieve the same key that we initially set to check if it was set. Now, if we have a configuration ID, in that case, we're going to set the config ID state to that configuration ID. And if we don't, then nothing is going to happen. This is already null by default, right? It's going to stay null. And to tell the user fact it should only run once and not on every render, we're going to pass it an empty dependency array. Great. Now we want to see if the user is logged in or not. And the reason for this is that we want to make sure that all users that register or log in through kind definitely also exist in our database. Do you remember earlier when we had to create the user in our database ourselves? That's not what we want to do. Of course not, right? When a user logs into our system, they should automatically be also put into our database. And that's another thing that the auth callback is very good for. So to do that, we're going to say const empty object is going to be equal to use query. This is the first time we're going to make use of use query, also from 10-stack query. And this takes something called the query key. You already know what this is for. Same thing as for the mutations for caching and invalidation. And we're going to call this the auth callback. It's nothing that we're going to make big use of in this video because we don't need to. The query function is going to be an asynchronous arrow function. And this is going to call something called, let's say, await, because that's going to be asynchronous, something called get auth status, which is a function that we are going to define ourselves, just like we did with the mutations earlier. This will be a server-side action that we can trigger to simply get the current login status of the user and to see if they are synced with our database. So this auth callback is going to ensure, basically as a kind of question we can put here, is user in our database? Question mark is the user, and if they are not, then we will create the user entry automatically, so we don't of course have to do any of that ourselves manually. That would be, just imagine, that would be absolutely horrible. Now inside of our app folder, in the auth callback folder right here, let's create a new actions.ts to actually define this get auth status. Right. Remember, at the very top, as always, we're going to say use server because they should only ever be executed on the server side. And then from here, we're going to say export const get auth status. And all this does is get the current login status of the user and sync them with our database. So first off, we want to get the currently logged in user, right? We're going to say get user, destructure that from our authentication provider, get kind server session, because this is a server-side running function, as I just explained, right? A server action. And now to actually get the user object, we're going to say user is equal to await get user, just call that function. And because we want to do some awaiting, we need to mark this function as asynchronous in order to do that. And now this is either going to be the logged in user, or if the user is not logged in, this is going to be null. Right? And if we don't have a user, which is optional, .id, right? The user doesn't have to exist. Or if we don't have a user.email, in that case, we are going to throw a new error and we're going to say invalid user data. Basically, we can't handle this case if the user doesn't have an ID or they don't have an email. So we're going to throw in that case. Right? And you're going to see exactly why we throw in a second here. That's going to be important. You're going to see why. And now we're going to check for the existing user in our database, right? Does the currently logged in user exist? We're going to say const existing user is going to be equal to await db. Let's import our database, Prisma, .user.find first. And now what's the thing that we want to check for? Of course, does this user exist in our database? So where the ID of that table entry is going to be the user.id. And either there is a user with the currently logged in user ID or not. And if there is not an existing user, in that case, we need to create an entry in our database, of course, right? We're going to say await db.user.create. That's going to create a new entry. And in here, we still need to pass the data that we want to create this user with. So that's going to be like the ID, the user.id that comes from kind, and also their email, which is going to be the user.email. There we go. So we're automatically creating this user with the ID and their email in our database. And if there is this user already in the database, well, we don't need to create a new one. In that case, we're just going to return from this function a success property of true. And now comes the part that I teased earlier. Why do we throw here? And that's because we want to retry for as long as the user is not in our database, right? Every user on their first login and all subsequent logins will invoke this function. So we want to make sure that the user, in order to do anything in our entire website, they are in our database. That's very important. Right, so to do that, let's first off import our action that we just created, the getAuth status, and then we're going to pass two more things into this use query. The first one is going to be a retry of true, right? So if the user doesn't have an email or not an ID, right? So if they're not logged in after all, in that case, we're going to keep retrying. And then the retry delay is going to be 500. That's in milliseconds. So between each retry, to call this getAuth status function until it doesn't throw, right? No matter how long that takes, until the user is in our database, which is important. And we are going to retry in 500 millisecond intervals. And we can simply destructure the result from calling this function right here and call it data from our use query. And now comes the important part, the redirection. If we have the data.success property, in that case, that means, right, if we check interaction, what does it mean? That the user is successfully in our database. Everything is fine. The user is synced. This is exactly the perfect case, right? And now we're going to do one more check. If there is a config ID, if the user was currently creating their config and clicked this button and was prompted to log in that case, we can draw that ID from local storage. In that case, we want to put the user back to where they were so they don't have any interruption in their checkout flow, right? And in order to do that, we're going to need access to the router, which comes from the use router hook from /navigation. As we did before, you already know how this works. And now we can simply call the router.push to actually push a certain URL path into the user's browser. And that path is going to be /configure/preview, and then $ID is going to be equal to the config ID. So basically the exact same path as they came from when they clicked the login button, right? And what we're also going to do is clear the local storage. So above the router.push, not after, because afterwards the user is already going to be gone, right? The URL is already going to be changed. So before we push into this, and we're going to say local storage.remove item, this time the configuration ID, right? So we read it once, and then once we push the user, we remove it. So if they ever log in like 2-3 days later through the landing page, then we don't again push them to an item that they might have already bought, right? That would make no sense. And else, if there is no config ID, in that case, we're simply going to push them to the landing page. Right there. Awesome. Okay, and now to actually give some user feedback while they are on the auth callback page, which won't take long. Right, this will run really fast. We're doing just one database lookup, one conditional check, and maybe creating a user. This will be really fast. So they're going to be on the auth callback page for like a second, maybe. But to still provide visual feedback to what's happening, we're going to return some very basic loading state for this page. So at the top level, we're going to return a div. And this div is going to get a class name of width full, a margin top of 24, a flex, and a justify center. Let's open this div up, and inside of here goes one more div with a class name of flex, flex-call, items-center and a gap of 2. And now let's open this div up. Inside of here, we're going to put a loader2 element, or icon rather, from Lucid React as kind of a loading spinner. The class name of this is going to be a height 8, a width 8, an animate-spin to actually make it spin around in circles, and a text zinc of 500. And now below this icon, we're gonna put an h3 element, and this h3 element, let's scroll down a bit, is going to get a class name of font semi-bold, and lastly text XL for extra large. And inside of here, we're gonna say logging you in ... to kind of, you know, let the user know what the hell is going on. And lastly, we're going to put a p tag here, and let's say you will be redirected automatically, period. Because again, right here, yes, they are actually going to be redirected. So the user doesn't have to worry about anything. All is done for them. So let's verify that this works, right? We're going to expand this page. What do we expect to happen? Currently, we are not logged in, right? So if you want to kind of test this with me, make sure you're logged out. Let's reload the page just to get the freshest version and be sure. And nice confetti, by the way. And now what do we expect to happen? When we click this button, the pop-up is going to appear asking us to log in. Oh, and by the way, one thing we should definitely change about this pop-up is the z-index for the backdrop. Because currently the nav bar is still kind of like it's overlaying and it doesn't look good. So just to fix that, let's navigate into our dialog component under source components UI. So that's going to be components UI, the dialog that comes from our UI library. And for the dialog overlay, let's add a custom Z index, and that's going to be also not like a 99999, like a lot of nines. So it's very, very high, much higher than the nav bar and everything. And by doing that, hopefully when we reload the page, then we should be able to see, yeah, that the overlay does, like it does overlay the nav bar now. And it oh wait, that's too high. That looks weird. Why does it, let's leave it at 999,999. Yeah, there we go. That looks a lot better. All right. Now it does overlay the nav bar, but not the actual like modal. That would look super weird. All right, perfect. So this is exactly what we want to go for. We left it at 999,999. Perfect. Now, what we expect to happen, right? What I wanted to say is that when we click this button, the modal opens. And now when we log in, we're going to get back redirected automatically to the same page, not to the home page, to this exact page. That's what we expect to happen. So let's try that. Let's hit login. I'm going to open my email here on the right hand side. There we go. Let's grab the code, copy and paste it over and hit continue. And wow, okay, that didn't work because we forgot like the most simple thing, right? And that's going to be in our .env file. One thing we need to change is the kind post login redirect URL, where we are redirected after we log in. That's currently the homepage. That's why we land on the homepage. That should be, of course, our auth callback that actually handles the synchronization between database and kind or authentication provider. And we need to save that. And then we can always know that we synced the user and send them back to where they were. So let's kind of navigate back here to the preview where we just were. Let's hit sign out again. And let's, yeah, that didn't work. There we go. Okay, now we are logged out. Right? Okay, perfect. So we're logged out. We're on the configure page. That's exactly where we want to be. And now let's try this again. So just navigate back to the actual preview page and make sure you're logged out. That's where we want to be. Okay, now what we expect to happen is to be redirected to the same page after we log in, right? So let's try that. Let's hit login. And once again, that's going to send us a code via email that we can simply copy and paste over. And let's try this. We should now be redirected to the auth callback. And perfect, logging you in. Very, very nice. And we are redirected right to where we were. There's no interruption in our flow. And we're actually logged in properly now. Very nice. Awesome. That's exactly how we know this works. This works through local storage. If you've never worked with local storage before, it can be very helpful for exactly stuff like this. and now you know how to use it, how to kind of redirect users around with query parameters, how to check if the user is synchronized to our database using the get auth status, and now the user is synced to our database and all ready to check out and actually pay us because the payment already works. Very, very good job, dude. We are making great progress. Now the user can pay. And next up is going to be the thank you page that thanks the user for placing their order and actually paying us. And that's of course going to be fully secure. You're going to learn how to read data from Stripe, and that one is going to be really cool as well. We're making absolutely killer progress together right now. Let's go and implement that part next. All right, dude, very, very nice. And again, for me, it's the next day, so I'm just trying this out once again with the image, and it takes sometimes really long in local development, especially when you first start it up. Anyways, we're gonna continue, as I just mentioned, on the thank you page. So let's take a look at how this works conceptually, because, oh, what's the thing here? Cannot get user details, no authentication credential found. Well, yes, that's fine because we're not actually logged in, so that's not really a problem. So the first, I want to tell a little story. So the first freelance client I ever got was like 2.5 years ago, and basically I put my services on Fiverr, right, which is like a freelance site where I also hired the illustrator for this project, right? So I put my this is not an ad, by the way. I just put my services here on Fiverr in hopes that anyone wants to hire me for me to get my first freelance client. And somebody actually reached out after a couple of days. I had no experience, no portfolio, nothing. And they asked me, so here's what they asked me, okay? Can you do payment system? They asked me if I can implement a payment system for them. And I was like, hell no, I cannot do that. I never did that. I have no idea how that works. And surely that's a lot of effort with a lot of security considerations and so on. And if it would, like, if you implemented it from scratch, yes, it would be. But with Stripe or any other payment provider, essentially like Lemon Squeezy or Paddle, or there are good alternatives to Stripe as well. It's not just Stripe. Actually, it's not hard at all. And I want to teach you, like right now, not only in this video, right now, how it works. And so if a potential freelance client ever asks you if you can do it after this video, you're going to be able to say like, hell yeah, I can, because I learned it from Josh. Hopefully, right? If I explain it well enough, hopefully it's going to work out. I'm going to try my best. So conceptually, how this works, a payment flow. Okay, here's what you need to understand how this works conceptually. So we have the payment flow. And you see the checkout page, right? We check out here. Let's quickly sketch this out. This is the preview page, right? So let's call this the preview page. When they click the continue button, then the user is forwarded. Let's say continue. That's the button they click. The user is then forwarded to the hosted checkout page by Stripe, right? The checkout page that we already saw where we input like the 4242 credit card. Right? And when the user has paid on that site, all the logic is done by Stripe. We don't need to care about any of it. Once the payment is successful, Stripe will send us something called a webhook. And that sounds complicated. I know when I was a beginner, I was intimidated by this name. I didn't know what a webhook was. And I was like, what the hell is a webhook? Basically, once the user has paid, Stripe, right, will send a request that is not directly linked to this checkout page to or API, and I'm not really sure where I can draw this out. Let's just make a window down here, or API, and it's not directly related to the checkout flow, right? Because the checkout page, once the user pays, that will make a request to Stripe, informing Stripe, let's say Stripe right here, informing Stripe that the payment was successful, and then Stripe will make a request to our own API endpoint in something called a webhook. And basically a webhook is just a fancy name, let's call this webhook, for an API request. That's all it is, right? So what we can do is define our own API endpoint in Next.js. Nothing, no magic, right? Just a regular API endpoint. And when this API endpoint gets called, it gets called from Stripe. We need to make sure of that, but that's not very hard. So this API only gets called if a payment was successful, so we know that the user now has to receive their phone case, right? That we need to print it and ship it. That's all a webhook is. It's Stripe calling any of our API endpoints that we choose by URL, by giving it to Stripe, and also providing us with a webhook secret, so we know this request actually comes from Stripe and not from any user, right? And we can simply handle all the logic. What should happen once a payment is successful on our own API with whatever we want in a Next.js route handler. Super straightforward. That's all the magic there is, right? It's not intimidating at all if you know what's happening conceptually. Right, so this is why it's so important for me that you understand this, because it's really not hard. And payment systems, I had a lot of respect for them, and of course you should have respect for them, but don't be scared of them, as I was when I first got started freelancing. That's the story I'm trying to tell here. So we're gonna take a look at how to do this together, and we're gonna do it right now by defining that webhook that I told you about. So this is gonna live in our source folder. Once again, this is pure Next.js API if we want, or any other API, right? If you want to use Express or Python or Go, whatever, it doesn't matter. Any API endpoint will be used as the webhook that we define. So let's call this the webhooks folder in our API folder. And inside of here, we are going to create a new file called route.ts that actually handles the logic when this webhook is called by, well, technically by anyone. We need to make sure it is actually Stripe in the business logic in here. And this is a regular plain route handler. And let's zoom in a bit more. Let's export async function post right here. So this is the HTTP verb that we expect this function to handle. And we get access to the request, which is of type request or next request. Next request, same thing, it doesn't really matter. And this function, let's open it up, will handle all the logic when this API is called. So first off, we're gonna create a try-catch wrapper. So in case anything goes wrong during the try stage, we can simply inform whoever is calling this API that something went wrong. Now, the first thing that we want to do is to get access to the body that is passed to this webhook, maybe by Stripe. We're not sure of that yet. Who is calling this endpoint, right? So let's receive that body. Const body is equal to await rec.and.not.body or .json or anything. We want the raw body as text. That's going to be important to validate that this is actually from Stripe. And now to get the signature that is attached to this request, right? Stripe always sends along something called a signature if it calls a webhook from us. And we need to receive the signature and verify that it's actually coming from Stripe. And we can simply get this signature. Let's say const signature is going to be equal to headers. And these headers come from, and I think we need to do it this way, come from next/headers. This is a function we can simply invoke and now call the .get on here. To get the specific header that we're looking for, which is the, let's give this a bit more space, the Stripe-signature. That's what we're looking for, this header. And if we don't have such a signature, if it's not even passed, right? In that case, we are already going to return a new response. And inside of here, we can say invalid signature. And the status of this response is going to be 400 bad request, because that header is not even present. It's not only incorrect, well, it's not even present. And now let's verify that this request actually comes from Stripe and not from any random user. That would be very bad, right? Because essentially that would mean that anyone can for free receive a phone case if they just call this API. That would be horrible. So let's verify that this is a Stripe sent event. Let's say const event is equal to, and we can use our Stripe utility from lib Stripe to do this. .webhooks.construct event. That's what this is called. And this takes three things. First off, it takes the raw body of this request, which we already have right up here. So we can simply pass in the body. Let's also pass in the signature, right? That is the header. And lastly, the secret. What is the secret? Well, let's head over to stripe.com. That is a value that Stripe gives us. And let's give this some more space. Let's sign into Stripe. And we can simply grab this webhook secret. Let's say webhook right here in the search bar in Stripe, go to developer and then webhooks, and we can simply add a new endpoint. And we can right now just type in HTTP localhost, let's say 3000/API/webhooks. I think that's what we named the folder. And this is not going to work, right? Maybe this is not even possible with Stripe. And this is just so we can get the webhook secret, and we can always change this later. And then the event we want to listen to is going to be the checkout session completed. This one right here under checkout, or you could also search for it, the checkout.session.completed event. And Stripe is already going to give us some code for this, which we won't really need because we're going to do it ourselves. And let's hit add events and add endpoint. And yeah, okay, that doesn't really work yet. Let's enter a temporary URL right here. This is later going to be where we deploy this application. We're going to do that on Vercel in this video. For now, let's just say casecobra, I don't know, .com or something that doesn't exist. But we can change this later. And then let's hit add endpoint. And that is going to right here give us the signing secret. That's why we did this. This is the webhook secret that Stripe expects us to pass right in here as the third thing. However, we're not going to pass it as a string, right? We very well could, but this is a very sensitive piece of information. So because it is so sensitive, we're going to define it in our .env. And there's a lot of stuff going on in our .env, but that is fine. Let's call this the Stripe underscore webhook underscore secret, and that's going to be equal to the secret we just copied over. And then we can simply use the process.env.stripe webhook secret instead of defining this very sensitive piece of information directly here. So let's say process.env.stripe webhook secret, and we can put an exclamation point at the very end to tell TypeScript, yes, we are sure this exists. Great. And now if the event.type is triple equal to, and do we get, yeah, we get full type safety here. That's nice. Checkout.session.completed, the one event that we are listening to with this webhook, right? In that case, it means the user has actually paid. We are sure we have received the money. Stripe tells us this, and all the logic again is handled by Stripe. We don't need to worry about it. And in this case, we are absolutely sure that the user has actually paid. However, one check we still need to do is if not event.data.object.customer underscore details dot email. And by the way, the customer details are optional, so we need to put a question mark here. In that case, we're going to throw a new error, and this is going to say missing user email. Right, because we do expect the user to have an email, but of course this will be passed by Stripe. So this is more for TypeScript and less for actual runtime problem handling, but I think it's important to add. Right, and then below here, we can simply get the payment session. So let's say const session is gonna be equal to event.data.object. And if we hover over this, object containing the API resource relevant to the event. For example, an invoice.created event will have a full invoice object, and so on. Basically, all this means, who cares, right, is all the important information that we care about, like the user metadata and so on, that we passed when creating the payment session, is gonna be right in here. That's all that matters. And we're gonna cast this type as Stripe, which we still need to import from Stripe.checkout.session, because we already know what this event data object will be, because we're literally only listening to that one event, right? So this is just nice for type safety for working with TypeScript. And now we can simply destructure the metadata that we passed in when creating this payment session. If we go into our actions, let's see what those were. And that will be under preview. Right here, what was the metadata? This right here, the metadata. And we can simply destructure that right now where Stripe is calling our webhook, right? So we're gonna get the user ID and the order ID that we passed as the metadata, and that's gonna be equal to the session.metadata. Or we're gonna default them to null. So the user ID is gonna be null, and the order ID is also going to be null. So either we grab these from the session.metadata if they are present, or they are going to be set to null, which is of course a case we need to handle by saying if not user ID or not order ID. Well, we can't handle this request. That doesn't make sense. These will always be passed by Stripe in a correct kind of webhook call, so we normally don't need to worry about it. If anything goes wrong, well, in that case, we can't process this request. We're going to throw a new error saying invalid request metadata to then handle this case in the catch block here in a second. All right, Now let's grab the shipping and billing address that the user answered on Stripe. So if we go ahead and actually click checkout on our app, well, we need to log in. Okay, let's do that really quick. And because I want to show you the billing and shipping address, how we enter them. So I'm gonna choose my hello@joshtriedcoding.com email once again, and you enter your email right here. That's gonna send you the code. So you can just follow along as we do this, and I keep refreshing my email here on the second monitor. There we go. That's gonna send us the code from Kind that we can use to log into this app, and then we should be forwarded to the page that we were just on, because that is saved in local storage. Beautiful. So the auth callback still works as expected. That is awesome. And now when we click checkout, we're actually gonna get sent to the Stripe checkout page. Now, where does the shipping address and the billing address come from that we need access to here in our webhook? Well, you can see that right here, the shipping address. And if we enter stuff here like example town and some random stuff that I entered once, by the way, if I hope this is not an actual address, I don't know. By default, the billing address is going to be the same as shipping. If you wanted to pass something different, you can, right? But normally this is going to be the same stuff. So Stripe is automatically going to handle that for us and give us access to these values that the user types in here, their shipping address in the session customer details. So we can simply grab the billing address right here from the and that's going to be equal to the session.customer_details.address. And let's just tell TypeScript to F off. This exists, that's fine. And then similarly, we're going to grab the shipping address. So the shipping address is going to be the session.shipping_.